And we are live, back with another Boxing Squared live stream. Thank you for joining me again, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. Do welcome you in, especially if you're listening on archive. I've got a number of topics today that I want to cover off, and towards the back end of the video, for those that are watching live, I'll be covering the sort of Daniel Dubois weigh-in, a little discussion about that fight, but I'll leave that to the end, so if you're listening on archive, then at least the topics are more relevant than starting with something that, say, if you're listening days after this, has actually sort of come and gone. So there is quite a bit sort of floating around. There's been a bit of argy-bargy on social media between Frank Warren, Dillian White. Anthony Joshua's made some comments about Tyson Fury, a potential fight with him. There's been a bit more bubbling up around the place, more chatter about, will Anthony Joshua keep the WBO strap? And obviously with Tyson Fury, if he can get past Deontay Wilder, the prospect of an undisputed fight, if Joshua was to drop, or it wouldn't be undisputed, but a fight with Tyson Fury, I should say, if he was to drop the WBO, then that becomes more likely that this fight could actually just happen full stop. But it wouldn't be for all the marbles, as it were. But yeah, we'll talk about that. But there's all these other things going on, things that are happening, fights that have been announced. We've had a couple of prospects who'll be back in action. Jared Anderson in particular, he will be back September the 5th. We'll talk about that. His opponent, I actually quite like the step up. So there is a number of things sort of happening in the division right now. Not all of them massive things, but some good comings and goings and different bits and pieces. Tom Little has put his hand up. This is just not too long ago before I came live. He wants to face Alen Babic. And I think for Alen Babic at this point, not a terrible opponent, and I think for building his profile in the UK, that's not a bad fight at all. So I've just been trying to do a couple of things at the back end of the live stream as I've been sort of talking, sort of multitasking here. Because when it sort of starts up, it has the weird thumbnail where it's almost nothing. It's what you see on screen. So I've been trying to, I thought after the last one, I'll see if I can put the thumbnail that I've come up with as I'm doing the video. So I've been a little distracted doing that, trying to talk through the list. So we've got a number of people in the building already, 24. So thank you for joining wherever you are, morning, noon or night. So it's Saturday morning, my time. I was looking to go live last night, but after a full week of work and as I was mentioning previous streams, I've just started a new job, so yeah, it sort of felt a little bit smashed and decided, yeah, I'll just take it easy and come live this morning. And as I've sort of been, because I do a daily trawl of sort of social media and other bits and pieces just to sort of see what's going on, you know, and obviously update my files and folders that I have on the various boxes and different bits and pieces. And if you follow my Twitter, you'll see sort of stuff that I've found on social media I'll post, like the Tom Little stuff this morning. Cassius Chaney, he's back in action this weekend. I saw that he's weighed in. His opponent, Chauncey Welliver, 378 pounds. So, yeah, Welliver, that is, so he's approaching 400 there. So that's, yeah, I sort of took me a little bit by surprise. But I'll just get back to the chat window here. So we've got Michael Johnson in the house, Jake Munro, Kiwi07, Jody, Adam Fahey, Tony, Don, Bruce, Will Magic Man, Joe, Michael Johnson, D Hodges, Permex, Kellis Elland, LK. And yeah, so welcome one and all. So we're up to 27 already. So I'll get into my first topic, which was I saw Anthony Joshua had been talking about a potential fight with Tyson Fury. And the reason why I haven't sort of gone and done a video on this, it's I just, you know, a little bit gun shy about doing too many videos about this sort of stuff for a fight that might be the best part of a year away at best. So Bruce says it's Friday here in England, so it must be, what, about 10:30 or so there. So Right Hook Boxing in the building. So he has a channel, great channel. Go check it out. Also, you've got a couple of other people here in the who've already turned up who have channels themselves, like Michael Johnson, Boxing Talk and more. He does really good live streams, so do check it out. Gareth Hancock is in the building. Bang for Buck PC Gamer. He says, what on earth is going on with Murat Gassiev? Is he a heavyweight or not? Well, judging by how he's looking on social media, he's certainly filled out in terms of being a heavyweight. But it'll be interesting to see promotionally what's happening, because there was chat earlier in the year that he'd left Matchroom and signed with, because he was already with Warriors Boxing and I can't remember the other one. Was it Euro Boxing, I think? But there was some talk that he was going to be leaving the matchroom and having his own sort of fight off in Russia, the pandemic happened. Nothing was really sort of ever cleared up about that, because Eddie Hearn had sort of said, well, Murat Gassiev is still part of the stable. So it's unclear. He's been training, and there's plenty of stuff he's been sort of posting up on social media, but when that next fight is, yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to say. But getting back to that first topic of mine, talking of a potential fight with Tyson Fury, thinks he would beat him in 6 rounds. And I know this sort of talk will get fans on the respective side of the argument in terms of who they support really sort of talking, because obviously Anthony Joshua fans think that maybe Tyson Fury is there for the taking, that he can be hit, and Tyson Fury fans will believe that Anthony Joshua just doesn't have enough, even as a big puncher, enough ammunition to touch him. So we'll see with that. But Joshua says, I have a lot of respect for the man. He's a good family man and a good fighter, but on the other hand, I want to break his head. First 6 rounds, I know I'm going to take him out then. I've had a shorter career, so I'm fresher, I've been in the deep end longer, so I can handle the pressure, and I believe I'm going to take him out. Fury knew how to beat Wilder. He took Wilder out and schooled him really, but I'm not Wilder. I'm better than Wilder all round. Stating his case and saying he would take Fury out in 6 rounds should they fight. And let's just hope that this fight actually happens, or just, a number of the belts. Yeah, I'm not too fussed. I would rather just see this fight. So with that talk of the WBO mandatory, Oleksandr Usyk, and potential scope for Joshua to drop that belt to get into a Fury fight, I mean, that would actually be quite a sort of change in sort of direction for Joshua, who's talked about wanting to keep all the belts together, to want to unify the division completely, become an undisputed champion, be the first undisputed champion in a generation. So to be a certain look about that, I'm sure some people would congratulate him for taking the fight with Fury. If that was on offer, you drop the WBO, you go straight into that. So I could see that working. It would be a big money fight, a big fight for the heavyweight division, probably the biggest fight in UK history for the heavyweight division. So there's lots to like about it. But will the WBO be dropped? I mean, there's been a lot of chatter online, so it's a little unclear. But on the other side of the coin, the WBO didn't face Oleksandr Usyk, and this is on the proviso he would get past Kubrat Pulev in his IBF mandatory, which would come before a fight with Oleksandr Usyk. But perception issues if he sort of ended up sort of dodging Usyk and going into an undisputed fight. You can make points on either side of that argument, but I think a lot of people would sort of say, look, that Fury fight, it may not be there in the future possible, it may not be for every belt, but better off put it onto the one that is slightly quicker. So let me know if this is a little bit better. So Will Magic Man says, in heavyweight boxing, there's Tyson Fury, then there's everybody else. And Adam has said there's a lot of lag in the stream, so apologies. Hopefully things are actually improving now, so just let me know. So it looks like it has been a bit of an issue here. SB says Joshua has no intention of fighting Fury. He's happy fighting fodder for big money. Well, that does sort of sum up a lot of the heavyweight division these days. Joe DC says surely the WBO would want to be at the party, i.e. on the line as well. I guess it depends what sort of line in the sand are they looking to draw, because they could be subject to legal action if, say for example, they try to keep the belts together, tried to get part of an undisputed party and push Usyk aside. That may end up going to court. I think there would be a lot of consternation from the Usyk side. And remember, he does have some good backers, so I think they would be pushing hard for him to get his shot, instead of being pushed to the sidelines. Jim says, so Fury beat Wilder 2 times in 2 different ways. Okay, so we did that comment before. So Barbarian Missionary says, Usyk plays with AJ unless AJ finds that punch from the gods. Jacob John says, Auckland, New Zealand. Declan says, I don't see AJ wanting the fight until at least 2022. Well, some of it could be, there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment with the pandemic and other bits and pieces, crowds, and just stuff in general. It's a little bit ropey about how things could go. But yeah, we'll see. We've kind of been waiting for some of these big fights forever and a day. So assuming it's 2021 is maybe a dangerous assumption. Jody says Usyk should fight an established lighter heavyweight first. Would he beat a Povetkin? I don't know. Well, this is the reason that they're looking to have a fight with Chisora, because that fight establishes, if he beats Chisora and looks good, establishes himself at heavyweight. And because it's a British heavyweight, would have more eyes and attention on that. It's going to be in the United Kingdom. So that perfect fight to build towards a much bigger fight, given he does have that WBO mandatory in his pocket right now, beats Chisora, goes straight into a title fight. So this is why they need to have it, because it makes a Joshua fight, if that happens after a Chisora win, that much bigger. LK says Wilder is so bad you can't really use him as a yardstick to measure Fury's performance. And I guess as well, styles make fights, sometimes making triangle theories to sort of say this guy beats this guy because he beat that guy can be, a little bit, unreliable to make those arguments. So just if you can, let me know, has the stream quality improved? So I've just changed a Wi-Fi setting, so hopefully it should be a bit better for you guys. So just let me know if it has sort of picked up. Bacon and Egg says, morning, mate. Morning to you too. Fish says, thought he was fighting Chisora first. Yes, he is. And that was my next topic. So that's a good segue into that. So they're talking about October 31st. And the sort of schedule that it's looking, and this sort of explains why they're sort of talking a little bit about November for a potential Povetkin and Whyte rematch, because October 31st potentially for Usyk and Chisora, but that is also dependent on fans, so they have sort of put a caveat there. But Oleksandr Usyk on his Instagram came out and said, yeah, I'm looking forward to October 31st. If we can get this locked in, I want to fight on that date. Obviously, he's sort of been waiting for this opportunity, as has Derek Chisora. They've both been training diligently through the year for a fight that's continually been sort of postponed, and even now it's just sort of penciled in as opposed to locked in. But it looks like November 21st is a date being considered for a Whyte and Povetkin rematch, and Whyte has spoken about maybe fighting in November or December. But some of these things they have to space out. So you think October 31st, and then there could be a potential November 21st date. But also, then you think Joshua, the indications are he would be fighting in December. So, yeah, I mean, for Whyte and Povetkin, there could be a few things that don't lend itself to a November date or even potentially December because of a clash. Maybe it just has to get pushed out for a few extra months to January or February 2021, I should say. I think that just might be something that does actually have to happen. So Right Hook Boxing says lag has gone so far. Okay, great. So Will says stream is better now, not cutting out anymore. Hopefully it's not too dodgy on the replay, because that'll certainly scare people off early if they think, oh God, this is going to be continuing throughout. So thank you for raising that. I should have actually, because sometimes I've got two Wi-Fi settings. One's 2.4 gigahertz and one's 5.0 gigahertz. But the weird thing is the 5.1 seems to be, say if the 2.4 is running slower on video replays and stuff like that, and say if I'm going on Instagram and stuff, the 5.1, which doesn't like video, is good for just loading pages. So obviously I haven't clicked back to that. So sometimes I just, think, oh God, I'll have to switch over here and just need to get, because what I do is a daily trawl through social media just to, see what's going on. A lot of stuff I'm not posting or not using, but it's sort of filed away into relevant folders. And, over time I can just sort of build the different stuff for different fighters. At some point I might be able to use it in a video, and especially with training clips, so file those away, and that's the sort of stuff you see running in the background of videos. So I'll just take down what I can when I can and then use it when appropriate. But I digress. So Usyk Chisora potentially 31st of October, and it sort of lines up with if they're looking November 21st for Whyte and Povetkin too, which I think feels like it's a bit soon. And remembering Povetkin's going to be 41 for the rematch, so he's about to have his 41st birthday, I think, in the next week or so, something like that. He may have even just had it in this week gone. And then Joshua looking to get back in the ring against Kubrat Pulev at the end of the year. But I'll just cross to my my list here. Number of things. I've actually got about 15 different things. We've covered about 3 or 4 so far. Jared Anderson, he is back in action September the 5th. So the American prospect who is looking like, for the next decade, he's going to be one of the top American heavyweights in the division. Just 20 years old, but oozing with potential. He's going to be facing Rodney Hernandez, who does, he's clearly a sort of durable journeyman, but it's not without risk. He has stopped guys before who are either okay prospects or a couple of guys who have unbeaten record, that sort of stuff, and he is a dangerous guy to some extent. But if Anderson is going anywhere in the division, he's going to win and probably look pretty good in the process. This is going to be either a 6 or 8 rounder that hasn't been locked in. So if it's 6, maybe it goes the distance. If it's 8, maybe he stops him. I'm not sure. Hernandez has only ever been stopped by Martin Piccoli and also F.A. Ajagba. But obviously, those two are big punches. So we'll see, what sort of pop Anderson has. But maybe he can get a sort of an accumulation stoppage against Hernandez. I wouldn't expect Hernandez to get knocked out with one punch. Generally, he's a guy that has been stopped on his feet. So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. But I actually like that fight for his, his 4th or 5th fight in the heavyweight division. That's actually moving him along at an appropriate level. He's in the bubble. This is his 3rd fight in the top-ranked bubble. Hopefully he can keep getting this level of sort of fight, at least for a couple of fights, to get some rounds. Some of these durable journeymen is sort of what Anderson needs now, because 4 of his 5 fights, he stopped guys in the first round. And some of those puddings, he doesn't need to be facing anymore. At some point in the next sort of half a dozen fights, or maybe, something like that, you can think some of the more durable journeymen that are floating around the American sort of scene, maybe an Avery Gibson, maybe they could sort of rope in a Samuel Peter at some point who can go some rounds. You could think maybe a Joey DeWecco at about 10 fights. I don't know. Names or, guys at about that, there or thereabouts that have got a little bit about them, but ultimately they're probably going to be beaten. If, you're a blue chip prospect like Anderson, you're going to get by them and look mostly good in the process, but obviously needing some tests as well. So what do you make of that fight? SB says, did you see the state of Usyk's face facing Chaz Witherspoon, and he isn't a top 100 heavyweight? So that fight in the context of moving up to heavyweight, his first one, he'd been out of the ring mostly about a year or so, didn't look great in that fight, obviously started to wind through the gears, and ultimately Chaz Witherspoon had a couple of moments of success, but I want to see this Chisora fight to really get a level, because I think a lot of people have been quick to pile in on Usyk based off one fight, but he has been injured a number of times since making this move to heavyweight. It's delayed his run at heavyweight. Is that going to be a factor? Remembering Usyk relies on his athleticism quite a bit for his style. So if that starts to go, if he starts to be on the... remembering a guy with a very long amateur career. So some of these guys, remembering he's in his early 30s too, some of these guys don't age so well. So he's got a lot of wear and tear. It's a question heading into a fight with Chisora. Has Usyk lost a step through injury or anything else? Or is this going to be a case he goes in there, does a job, and looks good? I think, there's still a few people that doubt after that Tony Bellew fight, with Bellew having some success early on, but ultimately gassing and getting taken out. So, I'm interested to see what he looks like when he's back, because it'll tell us much more than a Chaz Witherspoon fight will. Michael Johnson, Boxing Talk and More, says at some point Whyte needs to put the blame on someone, on himself in regards to the WBC. And actually, Dillian White, this sort of gets to my next topic. So he is talking that he's excited about this rematch. He says, I've never been this excited for a fight before in my life. I was excited for the first fight. Now it's like turning pro all over again. I'm buzzing. I want to go to training now. I'm forcing myself to take the 2 weeks rest. It's all good. I learn quick. I just can't wait to get back in there. I want to go now. I've been hounding Eddie every day to hear what they are saying about this rematch. There's certain moments in your career that does something to you. The loss to Anthony Joshua has done something to me. This time, this has done something to me again. It's crazy. I feel young and youthful. I feel good. It's probably going to be the end of November, early December. So let's see. And then he goes on to say that he's still improving and that he's never proclaimed to be the complete article. So, yeah, Dillian White, obviously, this has sort of lit a fire under him. what's going to happen here? When's this rematch going to happen? Is it repeat or revenge? I know some people have been a little bit upset that there is a YouTube. And just a question. Someone keeps posting, I think someone might have removed the comment, I'm not sure, Porky's Corner YouTube channel. You're on the Boxing Squared YouTube channel, so, you know, you can talk about, you know, this channel and obviously engage with me as the host who's doing this live stream. But advertising for other people's channel while you're on this channel, it's a little bit weird. So in terms of Whyte and Povetkin, I don't mind that rematch. I actually think that's, you know, there's a lot of interesting storylines. Would I have rather have seen Povetkin go on to face someone else now that he's beaten Whyte and maybe Whyte rebuild? Yeah, I mean, but I don't mind that there is the rematch because, you know, what if it ends up being a revenge situation? Where does Dillian White go then? Or if Povetkin is beaten and it's Whyte manages to do something that he couldn't in the first fight, you know, or he completely changes something up. There's a lot of good storylines with this. Jim says Chisora has problems with any fighter that can move a bit. Usyk has some of the best footwork I've ever seen. Yeah, I think that sometimes with this fight is not really considered by people who are just having a casual glance at it. Because Chisora against some guys that don't move that well can look very good. But then obviously some guys he's fought who've moved before, he's taken losses and he's looked sometimes pedestrian. But often sometimes that has been written off as, oh, he wasn't motivated or he didn't train properly. But at the end of the day, you know, he's got a slew of losses on his record. You can't just write everything off to he wasn't motivated, but now he is going to be motivated. You know, some of that, I'm not buying that narrative. Okay, I'm not sure what happened to the... Oh, my chat window just stopped there for a minute. So, LK says, smash the like button. Yes, please do. So we're 33 in the building here. So wherever you are, morning, noon or night, do please hit that like button on the way in or the way out. I know it's something I often, you know, automatically do with the channels that I watch. So I'm interested to know, are you one of those people that just automatically hits like on a video, a live stream, whatever, or do you, because often, even on the videos that are a bit more sort of tailored to, yeah, because not every video is going to get mass views, but the ones that are more about, I'm not going to say obscure fighters, but lesser known fighters, the dislikes have to be coming from people that are actually watching the channel, that are subscribed to the channel. They are subscribers. So I often wonder, well, what was it about the video that, you know, some people got upset enough to hit the like button? And I'm not saying people just have to, if you don't like the content, yeah, feel free either not to hit the like button or hit the dislike button if you, but it's those sort of things that, you know, you just don't know what was the thing that triggered some people. I mean, obviously sometimes I know, you know, for certain fighters, there is fanboys on either side that just get bent out of shape. But yeah, it's one of those sort of interesting quirks. So sometimes if I get half a dozen or 10 dislikes on a video, it's like, you know, what was the point there that someone got so bent out of shape they hit the dislike button? Someone will probably hit it now just as a, you know, for irony. But anyway, I digress. So Jim says on your videos, I hit the like button, quality proved and tested. Thank you for that. Unga says, Usyk makes Chisora quit, similar style to how Fury made him quit. And that's the sort of performance I'm sure that the likes of Sky, you know, for example, would be hoping that Usyk can put on. Because they're looking, and Matchroom in particular, because they're looking to build up a potential Usyk and Joshua fight. I mean, if they don't believe there's enough money in there, or say, for example, that fight doesn't happen and Usyk just goes straight into a title fight, because it's not set in zone for 31st of October. I'm sure some of the money and that sort of side of it, unfortunately, it does sort of factor into these things. So if Usyk can't prove, you know, he can be a star in the heavyweight division by taking care of a Chisora, it could, you know, his image doesn't grow as they would probably like. Maybe they would sidestep that fight, but there is some perception issues if that happens too. So LK says, does anyone know if Whyte beats Povetkin, does he get his mandatory position back? Well, Frank Warren, he was talking to the media this week basically saying, you know, the winner, you know, after that fight, Tyson Fury would have a year to actually fight whoever has the mandatory. Barbarian Missionary says Sky Sport Boxing is a joke. Commentary is out of control, unhinged. Yeah, some of the commentary hasn't been great, has it? Adam says no argument, just a discussion, bro. Okay, not sure which conversation I've missed there. Jody says I was proudly your first like on this live chat. No idea why someone would dislike. Just watch it if you don't like it. Yeah, well, thank you for the like. I appreciate that. Sometimes I wonder because you get trolls coming to the channel, and once you get to a certain size channel, it just sort of happens. But I wonder what motivates these people if they don't like the content to come back all the time. Because I must be living in their head rent-free or something. Why would they spend time coming in? It doesn't make sense, only to hate on a video. I mean, it kind of seems, like what sort of sad and pathetic existence does someone have to actively, day after day, to come in to try drop hate? It just seems weird to me. It really does. And, I will sort of sometimes engage with these people. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt if they don't like something, and I'll sort of have a back and forth with them. But it becomes apparent that they're just a troll. I'll be like, there's something called hide user from channel. So, I mean, this is why there's not, outrageous amounts of, sort of discontent and hate in comment sections, because if people end up proving being, ridiculous people that are just trying to stir up crap, they lose their ability to comment on the channel. And I'm not going to apologize for that. I mean, I think I want to create a safe place for everyone to sort of go back and forth. And we're not always going to agree on everything, and we can have lively discussion, but some people just take it to like next level sort of ridiculousness. But LK, he has, is that a super sticker? He says, cool. So thank you for that. Jim Blankvist with the super chat there. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Sean says the videos are great and it's good to get objective boxing news. I don't leave likes as it clutters playlists, but comments and dislikes still show user engagement and boost your channel on YouTube. Well, the likes do. I'm not sure about the dislikes, but yeah, I mean, I like the engagement and the back and forth, and I do sometimes get comments from people saying, how do you manage to sort of respond to the number of comments that I do compared to, say, maybe other channels which are similar size or even smaller or bigger or that sort of stuff. I try to make some time immediately after a video goes up to be there to put comments and that sort of stuff, because I like to see what people are saying, the take on the video. I mean, and I'm not saying I'm always going to get it right or that I have a monopoly on the truth or anything like that. So sometimes there is very good points that are raised in the comments section that really do sort of, I like to be challenged sometimes on if there is certain issues. Maybe I don't have all the context and that sort of stuff. So the chat and the comments, that sort of stuff, it just add another layer to how I might look at an issue. So I appreciate all the engagement and all that sort of stuff. Jody Paulus with the super sticker, so appreciate that. Eddie says, what currency is SEX? Is it Swedish krona? Yeah, I think it's that. And I only know that one because Jim is Swedish, but also from the girl with the dragon tattoo books too, because often, that's referenced, all that sort of stuff. Adam says, at JD, 80 chat question for BS. If I have missed your question, because it's moving quite quickly, your comment, I do apologize. Sometimes I'm whipping between the chat and also it moves quite quickly, but also my notes and the topics that I want to cover. So at the point that I might have just covered off the topic, that's the opportunity to, there's like a natural sort of point where you can drop a comment and I'll start going through, but I'm just trying to scroll up here. So Joseph Parker versus Junior Farr, who you got winning that fight? At this point, I mean, I would have to say on form, but also resume and the sort of what he's proven at world level, Joseph Parker. I mean, Junior Farr is a good fighter, but I need to see more to really sort of get more of a level. He has obviously had a few shaky moments in a couple of fights that he's gone on to win, but yeah, I think if he had have built his resume a bit more, I might have a bit more sort of optimism about how he might go in that fight. JD says, thanks, I got Parker winning that fight too. Michael Johnson Boxing Talk and More says, I believe all he fights this year that a pay-per-view should be on discount or non-pay-per-view at all. And this might be a new reality, and a while ago, it was over the lockdown, I was sort of ruminating on a couple of things we might sort of see in the pandemic or post-pandemic whenever boxing was coming back. So this is just an aside, but I was talking about this on Patreon, a number of different videos with thoughts on related type issues. But, pay-per-view might end up being the default for a fight above a certain level. And it certainly looks like it could be that. I mean, there is actually a few decent fights that are on Fox and Showtime that are going to be non-pay-per-view, and obviously that top-ranked card with Lomachenko and Lopez, that's not pay-per-view, so that's a small mercy for boxing fans, because this is already an expensive sport to follow. I mean, even for some recent fights that, for the channel, I try to cover as much as I can, and certain fighters, certain prospects, I want to be watching all of their fights. So recently, Zhan Kossobutski, so that was on Fight TV. And with a lot more things sort of going to, platforms where you have to sort of, clip the ticket for a pay-per-view, it is a very expensive sport to follow, even in the best of times. But it could be, when you think about some of the pay-per-views coming up, and if you're in America, the cost is so much more. So the American boxing fan has their pocket sort of, someone puts their hand in their pocket for that sort of stuff quite a bit. But yeah, if you're talking about Usyk Chisora as a hypothetical now, with these are potential dates that could happen. Usyk Chisora end of October, then you have potential rematch for Whyte and Povetkin November 21st or somewhere there or thereabouts, and then Joshua Pulev. That's 3 pay-per-views in the space of about 6 weeks or so. And that was the plan as well. People forget that was the plan earlier this year as well. So then you have all sorts of other pay-per-views that could be in the mix as well. I mean, remember Joe Joyce and Daniel Dubois, that's going to be on pay-per-view. But also, like a Chisora and Usyk fight, seemingly dependent on those events going ahead on a crowd. So both of those, maybe they get pushed into 2021, which is a shame for the boxers and the fans involved, because when you think about it, some of what we've been getting is, there's been pockets of good action so far. The last few weeks, a bit more sort of, you feel like there's a full day of boxing, and you can pick and choose which cards, which of the good fights you want to watch, or you watch everything. But then also you have other weekends where there's not a whole lot on, especially in the heavyweight division. It's been a little bit feast or famine. There was a few different fights last weekend, the Whyte Povetkin one sort of being the main one. But this weekend you've got Daniel Dubois and Ricardo Snijders, which I'll come to a little bit later. The weigh-in, Daniel Dubois, a career heaviest. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit feast or famine in terms of the heavyweight division. But in general, there's at least 1 or 2 good fights in any given weekend in, across the weight classes in boxing. So you've got Jose Ramirez back in action tomorrow. What's that? Must be in about, 24 hours or so. Okay, getting back to the chat. So apologies if I have missed any comments here. So Air420 says Audley Harrison should come out of retirement and wipe out the division. Top comment, that's a very dry comment there. Lubak says Parker stops far in the later rounds. Joe says they shouldn't touch the heavyweight division. There may be a new weight between light heavyweight and cruiserweight, or they may lower the cruiserweight limit. We did get into this in the previous live stream, so I won't dip back in, but I just hope there's no more divisions. I think it starts to get a bit ridiculous. And we know why they would be creating a new one. They would say certain reasons, but it was all a smokescreen, because it's about money. That's always what it's about. E-Man says, DAZN will make it cheaper. Streaming like Netflix is definitely the future. Yeah, but DAZN, depending where you are, because they're looking for their global launch. And let's remember as well, there has been a lot of speculation about their future, and will they sort of bail out of certain markets? Are they still really committed to, long-term being in the boxing game? The ownership, remember, the owner is a Russian billionaire. Was it Len Blatt? Oh, I can't remember the full name, but he's a billionaire. He's looking for new capital to sort of pour into it, but seemingly not wanting to sort of, if he was to, well, I think they were looking for $1 billion or something like that. If you were sending a signal to the market that you were putting your hand in your pocket for half of that, and you wanted to get the other half from other investors, it's a good signal. But you don't want to put your hand in your own pocket. Just does make me wonder how much confidence you have about the future, and that you don't want to put too much in. But in terms of because I actually talked about this in a tweet a while ago, the cost, which was, and I've got to be very careful here, so I'm not going to say the numbers because non-disclosure agreements, because I've been doing that beta testing for New Zealand with DAZN and the launch, all that sort of stuff, which on my, I can't really go into too much detail because you sign certain things, but the proposed cost of what it's going to be, to me, seemed very reasonable, even though I cannot say it. I actually thought, it depends though, what level of content do they have, because in different markets they'll have different deals about which content they show. So, I mean, I don't mind paying for stuff, but there's also got to be the value there too. I don't want to just keep paying for stuff and, thinking, well, I'm getting ripped off time and time again, because that's obviously what drives people to stream as well. Michael Johnson, Boxing Talk and More, says expensive. ESPN Plus, Showtime, pay-per-view, DAZN bills got my cussed out by my wife. And I would like, I hope ESPN Plus comes to New Zealand as well, because that would be, because I did actually try to sign up to that a while ago, and that was over VPN, but their system picked it up, so I wasn't able to sign up to it because the cost of that was at about $5 or $6 a month or whatever it is. So even doing the conversion, it would be still reasonable, under $10 New Zealand. I thought, the value, what you can get there, not just boxing, but all the other sports, it's incredible value. But that sort of stuff not available where it is. It's kind of like DAZN and ESPN Plus, I would automatically be getting them. As it is, I've sort of had to rely more recently on Fight TV and stuff like that to buy, because you can get certain plans of certain things. They can cut it all sorts of different ways, but it's an expensive sport. JD says his prediction is Parker will put Far away early, like against Bowie Tupou. If I was to predict the punch that would sort of hurt and potentially even stop Junior Far, I would say the left hook. He's certainly been vulnerable to it. Devin Vargas was finding the target. He obviously got dropped in another fight with a left hook. That was against Dominic Gwynn, who was 44 at the time. Tim says, don't know how Usyk Chisora can get pushed to 2021. Usyk wants his mandatory. His fight is the Chisora fight is just to fill in time. It's not just to fill in time. It's that sort of test that will prove that he can sort of foot it. And it would build his profile and more interest in a title fight that he would potentially be in with Anthony Joshua. But if it doesn't happen, if they try to keep pushing it out and out and out, I could just sort of see that fight going away and he would just go, well, I'm going to have my title shot. At the end of the day, he just wants that title shot. The other stuff, the business side about getting more money and other bits and pieces through a bigger profile boost and a cut of paper, whatever, I think some of that just will be stowed and be like, give me my title shot. I've been waiting for. What is it? When did he, I think he... it'd be over a year now since he said to the WBO, yep, I'm going to take that title shot, thank you very much, by way of his super champion status from Cruiserweight. So Unga says Cassius Chaney today. Yeah, so that is a fight on a card that's in Kissimmee. I've still got to try find the broadcast details for that. But the weigh-in, I only caught up with that this morning, so I did tweet about that. Chauncey Welliver, his opponent, 378 pounds on the scale, but also interestingly, Chaney, career high 263. And what was sort of fascinating about that for Chaney, because he's been working in a new sort of setup with Herman Caicedo, who trains Luis Ortiz and some others as well, Carlos Negron. And it's an interesting setup where it's like lives in a compound, lives with the trainer, and sort of, really it's a lifestyle, and he's sort of committed to that. And it makes me wonder with the career heaviest, because there's been lots of stuff that's come up on social media that he's been posting, or others have posted and tagged him in. He looks in pretty good shape, at least in that stuff. So maybe this is a case of it's a run out and he's going to have a bigger fight coming up, but this is just to sort of shake off a bit of ring rust, been out of the ring for a while, that sort of stuff. Because I think he has looked better when he's been around 250, somewhere there or thereabouts. I was having a discussion with a couple of people on Twitter about it as well, and they sort of agreed. 263, bit high, but I didn't necessarily think it was something that was a huge red flag. So Jody says Dubois didn't look fat. Is he putting on even more muscle? So I'll come to that a bit later, because if people are listening on archive, by the time they listen to it, it might have already happened. But yeah, David Adeleye as well, he's on that card, so we'll talk about that card right at the back end. So 33 in the building at the moment, so wherever you are, morning, noon or night, thank you for joining the Boxing Squared live stream. Actually, I think what's happened because I'm on Streamlabs OBS, I think when I switched over, because at the start, if you've just joined now, there was a little bit of lag with my stream. It was sort of cutting in and out. I switched over from one of my internet settings to another one, and I think it's frozen the chat number, but also it's frozen in the box I can see on the left hand. Only I can see this, but the live chat feed, fortunately I can still see that. Otherwise I would have had to restart that. Okay, I'll just work my night. So Unger has put that DAZN price, which I won't say because there is a non-disclosure agreement. I don't want to sort of go against that. Adam Fahey says turned pro at 31 for God's sake. I think that's in relation to Zhili Zhang. Yeah, certainly he needs to get cracking. There's a lot of sort of heavyweights that are sort of clogging up rankings. They're sort of relatively well ranked, and you can sort of think they just need a big fight. Yevgeny Romanov, he's one. Clearly Joe Joyce, he's mid-30s as well. He needs a big fight. There's no guarantee Dubois and Joyce happens because they want a crowd for that one. Unger says Zhang was bang average in his prime, now way past his best. He actually, if you follow him on social media, they've obviously been upping the sort of production value, and they've been putting together all these little montages, and he's basically calling out the division, saying he's ready for anyone. JD says, thoughts on big boxing events with no audience due to the pandemic. The atmosphere is so different. When Whyte got KO'd, it was eerie. Yeah, it's certainly a bit different, but I don't mind it, actually. I mean, you certainly hear the shots landing, and there's like a few different, pluses that you don't normally get with the sort of the din of the crowd sort of overshadowing some things. But yeah, maybe it allows you to concentrate on a few other things because there's not as much distraction. Yeah, I don't mind it, actually. Even the fake crowd noise that they've had in a few events, is, because I'm watching the fight, so I'm sort of zoning some of that sort of stuff out as well. But yeah, no, it's all right. So Will Magic Man says there's 80 plus in the building yet now. So obviously when I did that little switch over earlier in the first 5 or so minutes of the stream, it must have just clicked a couple of things off here, and it's sort of struggling. But I did manage to get the thumbnail up, the new thumbnail at the start. So, but I digress. I'll get back to my list here because we've slowly been covering off different parts of it as different issues have been raised. But there's a couple of different things I'll just quickly whip through, drop some comments and thoughts, and I'll quickly get to them. So you're going to have Fury in the studio for the Daniel Dubois fight. We saw Anthony Joshua. He was present for the Whyte and Povetkin fight a week ago. And some of this tactic, I think it's, for me at least, it's clearly trying to bring a bit more star power and a few more eyeballs, especially from casual fans to these events. I mean, is that your take on it? Otto Wallin. So he posted a picture of, he said that the result of his fight, there was a write-up in the, I think it was the New York Post, one of the New York papers, about his fight with Travis Kaufman, and I thought, geez, that was a little while ago. I'd hope that it isn't, maybe that's an older fighter photo, but he said that he is looking to be back in the ring in December or January. So hopefully against someone, I wouldn't like to see anything less than Kaufman, but I understand it can be a bit tricky at the moment, and his promoter has been struggling to get Otto Wallin the sort of fights we would like to see him in with, but hopefully it's not another sort of anything less than Kaufman, but it'd be good to see at least a minus to sort of step up from that. He needs to prove to, I think, for a lot of us, where he really belongs in the division. Christopher Lovejoy, it seems like this fight with Trevor Browne, that he sort of said, look, this is going to be happening. And then he sort of, a week or two later, said the date's potentially being pushed back into October. He gave Trevor Browne an ultimatum. And remembering Lovejoy said he got a deposit for that fight. But he gave Trevor Browne a public ultimatum saying, if you don't come back with a contract for me to sign in the next 7 days, I'm walking. So who knows what's going to happen with that. Remembering that Browne was meant to face Manuel Cha or Mahmoud Cha in 2019. It was going to happen earlier this year, and it sort of never happened for various reasons. Perhaps this fight could fall over too. There's been a bit of a history of that with some recent Don King fights. Tom Little, so I posted this on my Twitter, it only sort of a couple of hours ago. So he said, if I'm able to get fit and you can wait to October, we said, I'll get fit, and if you can wait to October, I'm happy to take on Alen Babic. Clearly, negotiations would have to happen in terms of the money, all that sort of stuff. But, I don't necessarily mind that for Alen Babic. I think it's one of these things, he's still in a profile building mode. Someone sort of said, on my Twitter in response, maybe a name like Marius Fuck would be good to get in for Alen Babic. And I don't mind that at all. I think that would be a decent sort of step for Alen Babic. But there's that other side that at the moment, because he's, 5 fights deep, he's basically filling out cards, doesn't really have a massive following. He's not a draw. They're only going to spend so much on an opponent. So it's, we have to be realistic with some of the fights we'd like to see him in. I mean, maybe something with Nick Webb, maybe that's possible. I know Dave Allen has said that he would face Alen Babic, but I'm sure Alen would want far too much. Nathan Gorman and Richard Lartey, that's been announced. I really like that fight. They're both coming off losses to Daniel Dubois. That's happening on September the 12th on a card that's headlined by Anthony Yard. He's facing Dex Spellman. But the Gorman and Lartey fight, it's a rebuild job for Nathan Gorman coming back. He wants to prove, to heavyweight division where his place is, what he can do, his skills. Richard Lartey was pretty fun in that fight against Daniel Dubois. Even caught him a couple of times and backed him up once, made Dubois think twice about just trying to, trade with him and take him out. Obviously, he was able to do it in the end, but he sort of, momentarily sort of decided, okay, well, I'm just going to sort of reset and get out of this exchange, which I think for most people, we didn't know how good Richard Lartey would sort of come for that fight. Where was his real level? Because basically fighting no opponents of note in Ghana, and the first time he'd been out of Ghana for a fight previously, which was years before the Dubois fight, he'd lost it. So yeah, Lartey and Gorman could certainly be fun. Lucas Browne, he's put a post up on Instagram saying he doesn't need a trainer anymore. He's not going to have a trainer for the rest of his career. Said he doesn't need one, doesn't want one. He's basically going to rely on what he's learnt over the years. So my read on that is probably also he doesn't want to pay one. That's probably a big factor for it. He'll probably just hire some guys in for whenever he fights next, have someone in the corner, but do it on the cheap. I mean, I can understand he's trying to maximize the amount of money he's making in his career before he's out of the sport. Remembering he's 40 plus at the moment. Was he 41 at the moment? So yeah. So he is contracted to fight Abdi Davtayev. When that fight happens, who knows? Just checking down the rest of my little list here before we get to Daniel Dubois. I'll just come back to the chat, so I'm just reading over my notes as I go here. I think we've pretty much covered off everything else on my list through the rest of the stream. Obviously, Frank Warren and Dillian White having a bit of an argy-bargy on social media. So will Magic Man, surely there's no way the really huge fights will happen without crowds simply because of the loss of revenue. I can't see this behind closed door remaining economically viable for much longer. Well, the paradigm may just have to change. It may just have to be a case of they have to adapt. Maybe fighters and promoters, everyone's just going to have to accept they may not be the same sort of money for a while, and it could be a couple of years. Sure, they've been waiting and watching and thinking we might be able to get back to something. But obviously, it could, just not happen the way that they would like it to. So they may just have to take haircuts on, the pre-pandemic money. Just, it may be a thing of the past, at least for a while. So Tent says, would you be in favour of a button to mute commentators? How would it change how you judge a fight? I would just like the commentary. I mean, I always expect there's going to be a bit of bias. We spoke about this from the previous stream, so I don't want to completely relitigate it, but I think there is going to be a case to say just call what you're saying, but call it for both fighters in terms of significant work that is being landed. Because often for the house fighter, it's everything's called. The opponent, not so much, barely anything, unless they rock them badly. And then sometimes the comment is back that fighter, they've got a good chin for taking it. Eman says, Frank Warren is so cringy, the old timer doesn't realise it's 2020, and can we look online to see his lies? I can't believe he said people are crying for Dubois Whyte. He's a promoter. He's just doing what promoters do. I mean, if his lips are moving, he's probably lying. But that's true for all promoters. Just getting down the chat here. So Lubuck says he hopes that Gassiev fights soon. Yeah, that would be good. Topheavyweights.com. So that is actually a website, and he does use some of my content sometimes, so I appreciate that. He says Lartey won't go easy on Gorman. Yeah, I don't expect so. I mean, he would have seen the fight with Daniel Dubois, seen him falling short and looking a bit wild and ragged, and probably fancy his chances. Although I expect Gorman to maybe go back to the sort of performances that he put in against Kevin Johnson and Razvan Kajanu, where it was a much more disciplined effort, using his skills. But I guess the question is, if Lartey goes in there and starts landing something, he's really going for it, Alen Babic style, it could be very interesting, especially early on. But if it gets past 4 or 5 rounds, I sort of expect maybe Richard Lartey's gas tank will start to empty. I mean, certainly there is that question about how old is Richard Lartey. I've seen a number of people saying that he looks older than dirt, and that age that has been provided might be a bit optimistic, sort of Cuban style. Adam says Usyk has been WBA mandatory since the 22nd of June 2019. Jim says, I thought Lartey looked better against Dubois than Gorman, who looked awful against Dubois. Yeah, I mean, Gorman fought the total wrong strategy for that. Tried to go to war, and Daniel Dubois, he looked like the boxer in there, not Nathan Gorman, who was generally regarded ahead of that, to maybe have some of his arsenal, sort of having some of the slicker skills. But yeah, one of the things that's going to hamper Gorman is that reach, 73 inches. It's not a very long reach at all. He was falling short a lot of times against Daniel Dubois, but I'm not sure that Richard Lartey will be able to make that sort of count. He has got a reach advantage. I think it was about 4 inches. He's obviously taller. I mean, Nathan Gorman is listed on BoxRec at 6'4.5". Clearly, he's not that big. Michael Johnson, Boxing Talk and More, says Lartey needs to get a different team. Well, I think at this point, I mean, Richard Lartey's probably just going to take what he can get in terms of what's available out there. Frank Warren clearly has a relationship with him. I mean, I could see Lartey being brought in for other guys like David Adeleye down the line too. Nathan says Lartey will be dangerous early, but I think Gorman should be able to outbox him. Yeah, that's sort of how I see it. I think Lartey might end up landing a couple of different shots early on. We'll sort of see how Gorman takes it, but I do expect that Gorman will win that one. I think he will be more conservative. TopHeavyweights.com says Povetkin versus Whyte might be in Russia, maybe with crowd. Well, that would be interesting. But I'm not sure that in terms of Eddie Hearn, that there would be some pressure on Dillian White to make sure it's still a home fight, because from what I understand, obviously there's the rematch, but Matchroom have promotional control. So if they was to take it to Russia, they're sort of ceding some of that control to a certain extent. But what message does that send to Dillian White? Bearing in mind, he's on a fight-by-fight basis with Matchroom. So he might be able to sort of leverage that, because I don't believe that he's, I think at the moment, say if he wanted to fight in Russia against Povetkin, maybe Matchroom could be cut out of the loop. I don't know. Perhaps they have an option on him for a rematch. I mean, there's a few spokes to it, but I can't imagine that White would want to go to Russia. But it's certainly the economics of that sort of fight, if there was a crowd in Russia, probably stacks up better. Nathan says, apparently Babic is rumoured to be facing Tom Little next. Babic did mention that in an interview as well, but not official yet. Well, the timings don't really line up, because Babic is meant to be on a card in September. Little saying publicly, I'll fight you, but in October at the earliest. But maybe it ends up being Babic faces someone in September on that bouts card, and then obviously he could potentially by the end of the year fight on another card against Little. I mean, that fight makes some sense, and it helps maybe build his profile a little bit in the UK market. But, I mean, you could argue Tom Little, Shaundale Winters, maybe it's much of a muchness, or I don't know. I mean, actually, Shaundale Winters versus Tom Little, that would be an interesting fight, I think. Lubak says Lartey versus Babic would be fireworks. Yeah, it certainly would. And Lartey, he does have some pop. Andy Adam says Roy. Okay, different conversation. Nathan says he's surprised so many people take what promoters say so seriously. They're all con men. That's their job. Yeah, they're salesmen. I mean, what was the old Bob Arum quote? You know, I was lying yesterday, but I'm telling the truth today. Yeah, sort of sums it all up, doesn't it? Barbarian Missionary says Whyte is gone, too sluggish, lacking pedigree. Well, we'll see in the rematch, you know, obviously repeat or revenge. Nathan says David Adeleye, looking forward to watching him tomorrow. Another good prospect to watch for. Actually, I'll get into the Dubois and that card in general. Two heavyweights, obviously, that we're keeping an eye on there. Dubois and also David Adeleye, who's coming into his third fight. He's actually facing that guy, Phil Williams, who recently fought Doran Krasmaru. And even though Williams, his record, it's like 3-25. It's not great, but he's only been stopped, I think it was three times of those 25 losses. So he was able to take Doran Krasmaru the distance. Krasmaru, he is actually a sparring partner of Dubois. And Krasmaru was really starting to I don't want to say get desperate, but he was trying to stop him, especially, you know, he wanted to get that stoppage in that fight. Ultimately, it went to 4 rounds. And this one here for Adeleye, it's a 4-rounder, I think, as well, or is it 6 rounds? Either way, he's going to win. But yeah, he was a trim and ready 217 pounds. So again, around, he's what, 6'3", 6'4". That was again around the weight that he's come in for his first few fights. One was 217, one was 219. Looks really in shape there. He's going to get the win, probably by decision. But if he stops him, you know, stops Phil Williams, it's a bit of a statement. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him again. And Daniel Dubois, I guess this fight, I mean, what do we actually what can we say about this? Because it's a quick run out, it's headlining a show, but it's got to be one of the worst main events that we've had for a while. And that's because they changed the main event from Eric Pfeiffer to Ricardo Snijders, who is, for all intents and purposes, a cruiserweight. This is like his second or third fight at heavyweight. If it goes past 2 rounds, I'd be shocked. And if Ricardo Snijders gets out of the first round, he's doing well. So this is going to be complete and utter domination, and anything less would be disappointing. So it's not the sort of fight we were probably hoping Dubois would be in, because he needs more rounds, more seasoning. I mean, what sort of preparation is this for a Joe Joyce fight, should that happen? But perhaps that card, that pay-per-view, Dubois versus Joyce, maybe that gets pushed back. Maybe there is going to be more interim opponents, as it were. Not ideal, but it may be just what happens, given, you know, the circumstances with the pandemic. And remember, these promoters, they're sort of, you know, wondering how to operate in this pandemic at this time. And we know Frank Warren, from certain things that have been said publicly and other bits and pieces, maybe he's under a little bit of pressure right now. So he won't want to put on a big event and sort of risk it all and obviously take a loss. So he'll make certain the fights when they're ready to be made and can maximize as much money. And I can understand that, but as a fan, you know, it's not necessarily what I want to see or hear either. So Jim says Povetkin has really built a profile in the UK. He certainly has. He's had, as Adam says above that, he's fought his last 5 fights there. Price, AJ, Fury, Hunter and Whyte. Well, technically Hunter was in Saudi, but I guess it was a big British pay-per-view card type, you know, headlined by Anthony Joshua. So I guess pseudo UK. But yeah, he's obviously tail end of his career, making the most of the opportunities that have been available through the working relationship between World of Boxing, you know, run by Andrei Ryabinski, and the relationship they've managed to forge with Eddie Hearn in recent years. Obviously, Sergey Kuzmin's fought on a few cards as well. Barbarian Missionary says Huey Fury should have dropped down to cruiser if he wants titles. He's a big guy. I mean, can he get down to, I mean, what's he been weighing in at? About 230 or so, pretty consistently. There's still quite a bit to cut. But, yeah, I mean, there's other heavyweights. I mean, could you argue that David Adeleye, who's been coming in 217 to 219, maybe he would be more suited to cruiserweight to begin with. But I guess if you start at cruiserweight, sometimes you're sort of stuck with the stink of that cruiserweight tag when you come up to heavyweight. You have to convince people that you belong. Michael Hunter had to go through that. Oleksandr Usyk is going through that. We've seen heavyweights over the decades trying to sort of, you have to get that off your back to prove that, you belong with the heavyweight and the elites and you can do something in the division. Nathan says Martin Bowers has another heavyweight, Krasmaru, who looks decent but a bit plodding. To be interesting to see him against guys like Little, Winters and Sokolowski. Well, I did just refer to him just before in regards to he fought Phil Williams that went the distance. I thought he looked okay, but I mean, there was certainly a lot of media ahead of that card, and they were mentioning Krasmaru as a sparring partner for Daniel Dubois and all the rounds that he'd done with him, and that he was part of that sort of, was it because is it Croatian or Ukrainian? It's one of the two. I can't remember, but they were saying he was part of that good crop out of which either country it was, and I don't think we can sort of class him as one of those guys to really watch because it sounds like he's been starved of a little bit of opportunity. But from what I saw, I wasn't wowed either though. TopHeavyweights.com says if the Johan Dorper that fought Miller shows up on the 25th, Yoka will have trouble. It's an interesting fight, and it's not getting a huge amount of attention at the moment. Obviously, it's going to be in France, a little bit out of sight, out of mind. But if Duopa's got anything left, remembering he is approaching 40 now, he's still a tough test. And, this is a decent addition to Tony Yoka's resume if he can get the win. I'm looking forward to that one. Jim says, I would have liked Dubois versus Christian Hammer. I sort of think that level of fight is, and I say that level of fight because they're not going to get Christian Hammer anymore. The fact that Frank Warren pulled Pfeiffer out, remembering Hammer is an EC boxing fighter. So you have a whole bunch of guys over at EC Boxing, Ali Aaron Demiresian, Christian Hammer, Eric Pfeiffer, Mikael Wallish, there is some others as well. They're not going to work with Frank Warren anymore because of that Pfeiffer situation. So, but that level of, a guy who's somewhere around top 30, maybe between 20 and 35, I mean, you can make a debate about Christian Hammer, but solid opponent, comes to fight, and if you're not good enough, he can get a win. And obviously that David Price fight a few years ago proved that too for Hammer, but he's a quality operator. He can go rounds. Gave Luis Ortiz some issues back in, his comeback fight after the Wilder one. And he was catching Ortiz with right hands through that fight. But yeah, agree, that sort of level of fight would be good. But I think Frank Warren's closed off that avenue there with EC Boxing because of the Pfeiffer situation. Woka Sam says no good fights until October 31, Usyk and Chisora. Well, that's not even guaranteed, it's only penciled in. Governor Riffraff says, I love how Povetkin has never bothered to learn English, drags that Prince William guy around to translate. I mean, I wonder though, often with a lot of guys who, sometimes they'll end up breaking in and sort of interrupting the translator and sort of, start talking. I wonder if Povetkin's English is better than it really, that it's sort of we're led to believe. Daniel says all that works in favour for Joyce. I mean, you can make cases either way in terms of, say, this fight of Snijders for Dubois, because it's not going to be much chop. And if Daniel Dubois struggles to any extent for 1 second in that fight, we're going to be on him because we expect he's going to just completely dominate. And if he doesn't, we'll be asking questions. But the delay as well, Joyce, with maybe inactivity, he's getting older, he's going to be 35 probably by the time that fight happens. You can make a case that both of them are being slightly disadvantaged. But eventually, let's just hope that fight happens. And let's hope that if there is a new normal and the crowds are going to be maybe a thing of the past in certain places for some time, hopefully they can come to the table and, I don't want to say for fighters and to take less because we know what they put into their careers, and some of these big opportunities they may not get other ones, or they may have to work back for a year or two to get a similar opportunity in terms of the profile of a fight and the money. So it's hard to say take less, because obviously we want these guys, because people are taking cuts out of their purses all over the show. We want them to get as much as possible. But as a fan, it's the frustration of we're not getting the sort of fights that we would want. And then you end up having weekends like this where the biggest fight in the heavyweight division is Dubois in a mismatch with Ricardo Snijders. doesn't say much for heavyweight boxing in 2020, does it? So let's hope, I mean, and this is why, I mean, if there is some cooperation at some point between Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, they may just have to come to the table out of necessity at some point, because if the world is a bit smaller and there's no crowds and, the effects of the pandemic linger, they're going to have to adapt rather than just putting everything on pay-per-view. Because some things we're not going to want to see, want to pay for. And even putting on a pay-per-view that may, certain guarantees, what if they're not met? And the promoters all of a sudden are in trouble. And some of these guys, we need to see them keep going, putting on shows and cards and other bits and pieces, because if they don't, I mean, sport starts to contract a bit. Opportunities for fighters get smaller, maybe less TV dates. So, but the next sort of 6 or 12 months is going to be a very interesting time. That's all I'll say. So Eddie says Yoka vs Dubois been signed. Yeah, well, no, it was announced a while ago. So I did have a video up on the channel a few weeks ago. So maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think it was announced. Nathan says Yoka will beat Dubois, points or possible late stoppage. Dubois has had a lot of hard fights. He has, but one of the things I'm interested for is, we know Dubois is not going to take a backward step against Yoka. Can he, test his whiskers? That's going to be really interesting to see. There is, a lot of chatter about Yoka, his chin, how good is it? Obviously from the amateurs clipped a bit. So I'm hoping Dubois can really, because this is the best opponent for Tony Yoka at this point in his career. So it is a step up for him. I'm optimistic he comes through it, but be interesting to see if Dubois can land a few shots, because maybe, it's not without risk. That's what I'll say. We're expecting Yoka to win, but maybe the upset is not out of the realms of possibility. Nathan says Hughie Fury versus Christian Hammer would be an okay fight. It's going to be interesting to see how they can sort of match Hughie Fury, because I'm sure he has certain expectations about the level of fight that he wants, the level of money, but also what sort of cards are they going to put him on, because that'll sort of dictate, potentially the profile, and how much money he gets, depending on, how big the card is. But yeah, let's hope that some of these guys, we do see them sooner rather than later. Nathan says Krasmaru looks like he's had a decent base to build from, but fights in sparring mode a bit. Yeah, there was a little bit of that against Phil Williams. Felt he could have put the hammer down a bit more, but yeah. So Iman says Dubois versus Adeleye would be a good fight down the line. Well, I guess with the Frank Warren, the options to use guys, other stables like EC Boxing, and hasn't been working with her necessarily. And a lot of the PBC and top rank guys, they want to keep their good guys fighting in the States. It'll be, there's going to have to be some more in-house fights probably down the line, but probably that fight wouldn't happen at least for about 3 years, I'd say, because Adeleye, he needs to build his resume, seasoning and all that. Pretty raw, but he looks like a talent to watch. I'm interested to see him develop. Krasmaru says, Nathan says Krasmaru is Ukrainian. Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was Ukrainian or Croatian, yeah, but they were trying to bundle him in with the bunch of Ukrainians that are sort of floating around the heavyweight division, that next tier of guys that are coming through. You think the likes of Vlad Serenko, Oleksandr Usyk, Victor Vikhurst, all of those guys were on the same card actually recently. But I don't sort of class Krasmaru in that sort of tier of guys yet. I sort of, we need to see more. Jim says the time is 12:30 in Sweden, and Lagavulin is getting to my head. Loving the stream. Is Lagavulin a type of alcohol, I take it? Do let me know. That sounds interesting. Is it a vodka or a whiskey or something like that? Or is that some sort of Swedish specialty? Right Hook Boxing says S-Jam prospect Johnny Fisher has joined Mark Tibbs. Interested to see what he brings. Yeah, I tweeted about that the other day, and I did mention it in the stream the other day. So he's 21-year-old prospect. Sam Jones had told me this was a guy that's going to be a problem for the heavyweight division. I had only obviously recently sort of put on my radar because of that signing. But yeah, Mark Tibbs, he retweeted that tweet that I did. So he's the Romford Bull Johnny Fisher. So we have to see. I mean, I have got nothing to sort of judge him on yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing him. Right Hook Boxing, Oh, Nathan says, Cassius Chaney fights tonight. I think another guy who needs to step up soon. Yeah, well, he's like 33 years old. I think this is just a quick run out, maybe blow off a little bit of rust or something, but ahead of something bigger. Because initially, Herman Caicedo, when he was on the Boxing Voice, maybe 3 weeks ago, something like that, he was talking about Chaney being on a card potentially in November later this year. So actually Herman Caicedo's got a decent little sort of stable at heavyweight, actually, sort of in that sort of setup that he's got. You know, he's got Chaney, he's got Carlos Negron, Luis Ortiz. Lubuck says Hammer was happy to trade with Ortiz and should have gone after Ortiz. I think it was also a case though in that fight that he started to gas a bit, so I'm not sure he could sort of keep it up. Unger said, what happened to Romanov? Yeah, great question. So he's still active on social media posting to it, but he's in that unenviable position where it's sort of that no man's land part of his career, about 15 fights in. He's got a ranking, but can't really seem to make much happen. I mean, we've seen that with Martin Piccoli more recently too. Jim says, Hammer is the kind of Jimmy Young of our age, pretty skilled and makes everyone look bad. Yeah, that's not an unfair comment. Nathan says, Helenius is still going strong. Had a good win over Kovnatsky last time. And I actually just posted a clip up, which I pulled down, sort of stored in my... Because there's actually, I mean, I'll let you in on... there's certain fighters that post a lot of stuff to their social media. And say when I'm doing a mashup video or something like that, which... time-wise, I haven't had a lot of time to do those recently, but then the streams are a good sort of alternative to talk about all sorts of issues. I think I've got through about 20 different heavyweight boxes and little updates in this one, but some fighters, you can think like a Lucas Browne, they post video clips of them training almost every day, so it makes it easy if there's some little newsworthy thing that, you know, you can include that and there's some video to go with it. But then there's other fighters that almost post zero footage, and even some of the big names. But yeah, Robert Helenius is a guy who hasn't posted a lot of stuff. I only think I've got like 7 little video clips, and that's over the course of like the last 2.5 years, sort of, or 3 years or whatever, since I've been running the channel. But yeah, no, he posted something saying effectively that he was sort of sharpening his axe or his tools or something like that. Nathan says Helenius versus Martin or Brazil would be fun, actually, or Martin versus Brazil. Yeah, I think we're going to get some sort of combination of that. I mean, maybe Luis Ortiz is in with one of those names as well. A couple of people sort of said, well, maybe Otto Wallin, because he works with, he's promoted by Dimitri Salita, who has sort of, you know, he sells his heavyweights to the highest bidder, that sort of stuff. Maybe Otto Wallin could be thrown in with one of those guys too. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see when Fox release the second part of their sort of back end of the schedule, because all the PPC heavyweights are all tied, seemingly tied to whatever those cards are at the back end of the year. But we're kind of getting pretty close to the back end of the year. Pacer says, why did Joyce pull out? Pull out of what? There is a fight with him and Daniel Dubois that's penciled in for October, but it's not guaranteed. But that will be his next fight. Adam says he's looking forward to Ramirez versus Postal. Yeah, good fight. Victor Postal, he is a good fighter. He gave Josh Taylor a good fight. And yeah, Ramirez, it'll be interesting to see some of these guys when they move up, because Terence Crawford at welterweight, you know, I mean, that Brook fight that they're talking about for Crawford, you know, I'm not so enthused about that. I mean, I would like to see some of those guys that are signed with Top Rank that are at 140, you know, potentially as opponents for Terence Crawford, but maybe that's sort of a year or sort of way, because they've got to acclimate to a new weight. TopHeavyweights.com says it'll be interesting to see if some heavyweights would rather pack it in than take less money. And we could see a little bit of that, maybe. Some of the guys that are at a certain age or certain vintage, or, you know, even some of the journeymen might be just like, I'm just making better money just doing a regular day job. Nathan says, even the American cards look weak, to be honest. Ramirez vs. Postal is best fight. Nathan says, who do you believe is the most underrated heavyweight currently? I think Martin Piccoli. I think he really has improved since that loss to Michael Hunter. I've seen the improvement. Obviously, they made some changes, but since that fight, Hunter has obviously, his level has elevated quite quickly. So that loss, in retrospect, doesn't look maybe nearly as bad at the time, where it was a former cruiserweight coming up and Martin Bakole being a prospect looking to keep winning. Obviously, Bakole had been doing all sorts of things around the UK, all the gym stories, and he was starting to become a guy there was a lot of buzz and chatter about. But after that, it's just all sort of disappeared. I think he's probably the most underrated guy at the moment in terms of guys that are at a certain level. I think there are some prospects that you could argue are underrated, but that's because they're haven't really been in fights of note to sort of capture the attention of maybe the broader boxing fandom. So Jim, with the answer to the question that I posed, so he says, Lagavulin is single malt whiskey. I recommend it. You know what? I'm not really much for spirits. I can't, don't like wine either. So beer, I like craft beer. I mean, most beer, if it's cold, I'll drink it. But yeah, I do, pale ales, lager. It sort of depends. Sometimes the weather, a nice lager in hot weather is good. Pilsner. But yeah, I don't really drink too often, actually. Nathan says Sam Maxwell versus Joe Hughes looks best on the card, and Sonny Edwards versus Isumba is a solid fight. The rest is weak, though. Barbarian Missionary says Whyte loss still rated as TKO, another BBC gambit. Okay, we've been going for an hour and 16 so far, so we'll maybe go for another 10 or 15 minutes for as long as questions and comments are coming in. It still says on mine, it's obviously frozen 33 in the building, but however many of you are here, because I can't see whatever the live number is, thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. I do appreciate it. So we're about 10:45 in the morning here, so it is Saturday morning here, my time in New Zealand. And yes, if you are new to the channel, I am from New Zealand. Often I get people thinking I'm from Australia or potentially the UK, and sometimes I even get am I from Canada, which I don't think I've sort of got a Canadian accent, but it is what it is, I guess. Nathan says Dave Alen seemed to be getting overrated at one point in his opinion. I don't know if he was ever overrated at one point. I think we mostly knew his level, but in terms of, was he overexposed in terms of the coverage he was getting? Did he have too much exposure? Yeah. But, I think that's sort of dialed back now. But I think there's going to be a bit of a quandary for him, because he wants to rebuild and do things the right way, as he says. But, he's probably going to want more money for the fights that he's realistically going to get for the sort of level that he wants to fight at. And based on some paydays that he's got, I mean, I can understand why. But, I think he will need to be realistic. It's, the sort of money that he was getting offered to fight Daniel Dubois or Hughie Fury. I mean, is that out there for him at the moment for other people? So First Round Boxing says Junior Farr will shock New Zealand in the boxing world and beat Joseph Parker. Well, hopefully they make the fight and we see that. My personal opinion, I think Parker is the favourite for good reason. And I think Junior Farr's resume is a little thin heading into that fight. But if he can upset Parker, it will be a massive upset. Nathan says, would Chisora beat guys like Bakole, Kuzman, Zhang? I think Bakole beats Chisora, but I think Chisora beats Kuzman. Definitely. Kuzman's really sort of failed to launch. He's looked very pedestrian in the heavyweight division. I think slow feet. I think Chisora would be all over that. Zhili Zhang, that'd be interesting, because Zhili Zhang is a mover, and if he was able to sort of implement a strategy as others have more recently, like 2017 from Ajit Cabello, he could give Chisora some problems. But I think many people heading into that might back Chisora. I mean, what's Zhang got left in the tank? He's 37 years old and kind of really never gone anywhere since turning pro. It's sort of, he turned pro about, was it 6 or 7 years ago now, but 20 fights under his resume, or 19, whatever it is, just really hasn't sort of fired as we probably would have liked. So the chat seems to be picking up speed now, so I'll try to keep up here. But if I do miss your comment, I do apologise. So we'll just see where we get to. Bacoli stops Chisora, in my opinion. Zhang is that far over the hill, it's not even a joke anymore, and Kuzmin would be a dust-up. Wokusam says, Huck fights Lewandowski tomorrow, and it's probably impossible to watch it online. Maybe not. I mean, often the German cards, you can just watch them on the German websites, even without a VPN. So I haven't investigated which channel that is on, but often some of these ones, it's actually a lot easier than you think if you can find out where it is for the first place. Nathan says Zhang is a tough one to judge at his age and only 21 fights, and his best win is Rudenko. And he looked pretty good against Rudenko, but I mean, Rudenko's probably removed from his best as well. Dillian White is a fraud. He's had 5 pay-per-view fights, but he's never even fought for a European belt. Does if you're in the UK and sort of, subscribe to that theory of you have to do area level, domestic, English, European and world title, does someone just have to fight for a European title? I mean, given White turned, he was a kickboxer who sort of morphed into a boxer, and, if you're saying he's a fraud, and the level of wins that he's got some good wins on his resume. He's probably maxed out his talent. He's done very well for himself. So I would sort of say he's not a fraud. He's actually got some very good wins in the heavyweight division. He's probably done better than many expected he would have. Remembering he didn't really have a promoter until after that Joshua fight, and he's still on a sort of fight-by-fight deal, but that's on his terms. So I would say he's one of these guys, that's really squeezed everything out so far and done incredibly well for himself. So Unga says, I'd lean Chisora to beat Zhang and Kuzmin to beat Chisora. I think I'd go the other way on Chisora Kuzmin, but I mean, the Zhang and Chisora one, it's a case of what's Zhang got left. Could he implement a moving style for 12 rounds or 10 rounds, whatever the case would be? Interesting fights. It'd be interesting to see some of them, but probably they don't get made because there's not the demand, or, the promoters probably aren't looking in that direction. I mean, Zhang and Kuzmin, that's actually a fight I would actually like to see. And yes, they were scheduled to fight, but then Kuzmin, I think he was injured, and that's why Rudenko had to get pulled in there. So Adam Fahey is out. I bet you he's off for a round of golf. TopHeavyweights.com says Hunter stock has gone up. It definitely has. White is definitely vastly overrated. Well, maybe he's not a top 5 heavyweight, but he's still a top 10 heavyweight, and he's proven that with the wins that he has on his resume. But, not everyone can be the number 1 heavyweight in the world. But I think in terms of the fights that he's had, and the fact that he has been hurt and down and still managed to come through, you've got to credit the guy for, sometimes he looks a bit sloppy and ragged, but he's got the job done. Obviously not against Povetkin, though. And that's a repeat or revenge situation. So I'm going to have some thoughts on that I'll be doing this weekend for Patreon, for my latest Patreon video. Patreon.com/boxing squared. So do weekly topical videos. So if you want to check that out, it's from as little as $1 a month. Also, I recently started another YouTube channel. It's a bit of a project that a lot of stuff that I was filming over the summer, sort of, obviously at the start of the year, my time, but it's sort of a good project to help with editing and other bits and pieces, and just something a little bit different. So I only do 1 video a week there, so that's Amazing New Zealand, and you can click into to any video of mine, and in the description box there is a link that'll take you to that channel. It's actually my used to be my old backup channel, 99 Boxing, but I've repurposed it for this new channel. A lot of outdoors sort of stuff, fishing, camping, camp food, and all sorts of sort of stuff like that. First Round Boxing says Bacoli is the new Luis Ortiz. His age is a mystery. Even check the BoxRec heavyweight rankings to see what I mean. Nathan says White is a very good fighter, but he has had too much hype recently. In my opinion, I think Hunter gets underrated, and Bacoli. I sort of feel about Hunter that he's kind of appropriately rated at the moment, because people consider him generally somewhere either just inside the top 10 or there or thereabouts. So I kind of think, that's where, I think he is. So I don't necessarily think that he is underrated. and I don't think he's overrated. I think it's kind of about appropriate. And so Iman says, did you ever box? Yes, I did as a teenager. Unga says, boxing squared is Kiwi equals rugby, racing, and beer. Although, not really big on racing. Purple helmeted yogurt slinger, well, quite the name there, says Brewdog IPA best. Pacer says 121 in the building, so that must be about 10 minutes behind in the chat. So wherever you are, morning, noon or night, do thank you for joining the stream. And if you are listening on archive, apologies for the start of the stream. It was a little bit ropey with the quality dropping out with different bits and pieces, but I changed some settings. But First Round Boxing says, have a great weekend, Boxing Squared, and to you too. Jim says, if it's cold, I'll drink it. That's pretty much it. Most beer, the colder you make it, if it's a drop, that's a bit average. If you really do make it, because sometimes I like almost ice cold beer. There used to be one that was on in a place I used to live. They had it on tap. It was an Australian beer actually, and sometimes I don't think much of Australian beers, but it was called Carlton Cold, and it was just on the point of almost frozen. But in summer, it was incredible to drink. Lubak says Moa Beer is decent. Yes, it is. ToppyHeavyweights.com. Awesome stream as always. Hit that like button. Yes, please. So L-Dog is in the building. He's probably been here for 10 minutes, but hello to you too. It must be about 100 comments behind now. Slowly falling behind, I probably should say. The Shuba says, it's just the UK. We have this obsession with overrating and hyping up anyone that is English or from the UK. Probably what factors into that as well is that he was given the push by Sky. They needed another pay-per-view fighter. And he was sort of, maybe it was to begin with slightly square peg, round hole in terms of was his profile and, everything and the wins and the resume, was it there to justify it? But they've knocked him into it and he has ended up delivering for the most part, got past Joseph Parker, obviously a little bit of controversy, but it was an entertaining fight. The Chisora rematch, Oscar Rivas, and obviously now another pay-per-view with Alexander Povetkin. TopHeavyweights.com says Browne versus Lovejoy looks like another false start. Yeah, I mean, for so many reasons, I want that fight to happen just so, one, we can see Lovejoy, what he really is about, but two, Bryan's been out of the ring for over 2 years, so, and some of that's not down to injury, it's promotional. I mean, Don King is his promoter, and it's just not happening for Trevor Browne right now. Right Hook Boxing says he liked what he saw from Zhang, but his gas tank is dodgy as hell, that he reckons. And at 37 years old, it's not going to get any better either. Jim says Joshua never fought for a European title. Blue Collar Sports TV says sup lads in Boxing Squared, and hello to you too, Blue Collar Sports TV. So he got a great channel too, one of my favourite channels that I do watch on YouTube. And there's a lot of channels that I watch, but I don't necessarily comment all the time on, but I do have a bit of chat with Blue Collar Sports TV, sort of behind the scenes on Twitter, direct message, that sort of stuff. I was recently saying that sometimes Shannon Courtney, there's a photo, or it's a cartoon actually, from clip from The Simpsons where Homer Simpson made that makeup gun and he fired that at Marge and her face was all over the place with makeup. For whatever reason, that image of Marge always reminds me of Shannon Courtney, but I digress. BG London says, do you think Mauricio Suleiman allowed Dillian White to have a rematch clause for screwing him? Well, it's just a case of they had a rematch clause built in. It was effectively a voluntary. It wasn't some sort of mandatory defense of the interim title. I mean, they were always going to build in a rematch clause for White, no matter what circumstances. So I've got Carlito with a number of questions here. Favorite all-time boxer? Well, there's a number of them. I mean, normally it's sort of, you get asked who's a sort of top five, but Evander Holyfield, Larry Holmes, David Tua, there's others as well. Current favourite boxer, Joseph Parker, but that's, been a long-standing thing. Sort of followed his career right from the start here in New Zealand. The hype sort of come off for him, but I'm still supporting him but I try to keep it 100 and even on the channel about my coverage of him, and if it's there is something that his team isn't doing, I will say. Favourite UFC fighter, don't really watch the UFC much. Colin says, just mentioning how quality Joe Smith Jr. was against Alvarez, battered him up. Beterbiev and Smith war needs to happen. Yeah, Joe Smith looked really good in that. Pacer says his favourite all time is Nigel Benn, the Dark Destroyer. The Shuba says that was criminal. Callum Smith getting the win when we clearly got beat. Must be heartbreaking for fighters who get done dirty when it was so clear that they did the work to win. Well, those sorts of decisions, especially when it's a robbery or it's a close fight and it goes to the home fighter, yeah, you got to feel for the opponent, especially if they put in a good effort. Colin says Whyte isn't overrated. Top 10 was silly to choose the WBC when cleaner routes were available, favoured money over titles. He did. He totally did. First Round Boxing says, Mr. Squared, I love that you do videos about lesser known guys and don't just go for clickbait. Well, I appreciate the comment there. I mean, some of that is down to when you cover, because sometimes people don't realise I just do the heavyweight division. So I don't cover anything else but heavyweight. So for me, doing the heavyweight division, if I was just doing the same 5 or 6 guys time and time again, how boring would that get? And even with some of the issues that I covered in the stream, say Anthony Joshua was saying he'd knocked Tyson Fury out in 6 rounds. Some of that sort of stuff we've heard it before, and I hear it and I'm like, that's newsworthy and I could make a video. It could be a 5 or 10 minute video, but then I'm like, I just don't have the energy because some of it just feels like it's rinse and repeat. I'm at the point now where that sort of fight or an undisputed fight, I'm trying to make as few videos about it in general as standalone videos, because it just feels like, how long have we been waiting for some of these big fights? Yeah, so the lesser known guys, because I cover this division just exclusively, as opposed to anything doing other divisions. I have a real interest in in doing it for the channel and sort of the breadth of content for the channel too. Because if I was just doing the top 10 or something like that, it wouldn't. Yeah, I would get pretty bored pretty quickly. But I really like following prospects and their journeys as they come up. And I know that some of those videos are not going to do as well, but it's an active choice that I'm interested in. 2 videos I've done this week that probably there hasn't been a whole lot of other channels that may have actually Blue Collar Sports TV, he did a piece that included Gorman, but a lot of other channels wouldn't have marked Nathan Gorman versus Richard Lartey, or Jared Anderson versus Rodney Hernandez. But to me, those are interesting fights, and I'm following them through, and I'm invested in what they're doing and what's going to happen. There's some good storylines once you start sort of scratching below the surface, and hopefully, because I'm following it closer, I can bring a bit more over time. I'm bringing more insight than maybe you would just get elsewhere from someone who's dipping in for the first time, if that makes sense. God of War says other bits and pieces is probably your favourite phrase. Oh, I'm sure there's probably about a dozen things that I say as crutch type phrasing to get from one sentence to the next, like subconscious, type sort of stuff. Like sometimes I'll be editing a video and be like, I need to stop saying clearly, I need to stop saying obviously, stuff that I don't need to be saying at the start of a sentence, but it just sort of comes out. Especially early in the channel, one of the things that I was saying all the time, and it was obviously something that was just a carryover from just normal sorts of conversation, was So I really had to try work on saying that less and less, because it was just some sort of unconscious, it comes out. And even now I still say, at different times. But yeah, especially early on in the channel, that sort of first 6 months to a year, I really had to work on sort of trying to eliminate that as much as possible. A lot of people wouldn't have picked up on that sort of stuff. But, or I just said it then, but sometimes I would just catch it and be like, I said that 15 times in a video that was only 5 or 10 minutes long. So yeah, these sorts of things I'm trying to, straighten things out over time. But yeah, well, it's always a work in progress. The channel is always evolving, and even with the live streams, starting to do more and more of them, and I'm starting to feel more confident in doing more and more of them. But it's a good way as well, sometimes in lieu of having time. If it's these 1 or 2 live streams I've done in the last couple of weeks where it was on weekdays, and it was just a convenient way to do it, to get across the stuff that was going on. But also, I like to do at least one live stream a week, a longer sort of one. So I could have made videos this morning about a couple of different bits and pieces, but I was like, there was nothing that jumped out at me that was so notable that I wanted to spend 5 to 10 minutes. Because sometimes there might be some things that'll be a 2 or 3 minute video but then, I don't want to try to stretch it out into 6 minutes and to have it as, going over the same old ground all the time. But so these streams, they do afford me the opportunity to, one, there's the interaction and being able to get through comments, but also I'm one of these with covering the channel, and because I'm going over social media, looking for news, all that sort of stuff. I hate to let stuff slip by and not mark it, and this is why I put stuff up on Twitter as well, because if I can't do a video on it, I want to at least have said something about it somewhere. So Woker Sam says New Zealand has no roads. How do you survive? Okay, well that's a really interesting comment. I'll say that, but that's not true. There's roads galore. Hunter is a dark horse. Guy got some moves. Unga says we have roads that just go nowhere. Lightspeed says boxing circle, unboxing circle. Okay, I'm not sure what that's about. Ukemi says, I think that Daniel Dubois fight is a farce, and I think it's a terrible fight, just like you said. Well, it's a shame that's the fight that he's in, but it's the one we've got, so let's hope that he does dominate. Conniff says, if you were to pick 2 prospects to pit against each other, what fight would you make? Well, that's one I won't go into any detail, because I've actually got planned a video that I was putting up on Patreon, sort of following on from the Dubois and Hrgovic sort of suggestion from Eddie Hearn, and I was actually going to be expanding on some other prospect fights that I wanted to see, but possibly not possible. It's one of these things. Sir says, drink some spirits, boxing squared. I can drink straight spirits. I just, not good at drinking. But if it's mixed, I can, deal with it, but I'd rather have a beer over spirits or wine or anything like that. Ukemi says, people hating on Whyte because he lost to an Olympic gold medalist with so much experience, too many casuals who don't watch boxing. Well, I mean, it wasn't a fight without risk, so that's the thing. I mean, Dillian White took that. He wanted to clip the ticket on pay-per-view, and he got taken out. It's boxing. It happens. Alen Babic is hilarious. Love that guy. Says he does seem funny, and I did, that sort of rev up that happened at that press conference with Winters. That was quality too. Blue Collar Sports TV says he's convinced that Lovejoy isn't a real person at this point. It'll be interesting to see whenever we do see him. What's he really all about? Because fighting guys down in, pubs down in Mexico doesn't tell us anything, because we haven't been able to see any of the footage either. So Colin says, Blue Collar Sports TV and Boxing Squared at dual stream. Well, if that was to happen, Blue Collar Sports TV would have to do the stream, and I'd have to join it, because on the technical side of it, I'm sure there's a way that I could send out links or something like that. I just haven't figured out how to do it. Eddie says Simon Keane has retired. Not that I'm aware of. He's recently spoken about wanting to fight Tony Yoka. Ivan says Joseph Parker versus Babic. Parker wins that one. Will says Homer Simpson makeup gun. Yeah, well, if you can remember that from, I mean, this is one of those episodes going back to the 90s. It was hilarious. I just can't think. It's just whenever I see that, I think of Marge. So I must be about 15 minutes behind on the chat. So I do apologise for that. Colin says the Holmes era is very much like the current era. Yeah, I think Holmes certainly didn't get as much love as he probably expected he should have in his era. So Snickers has just been rebranded again in the UK. They've gone back to calling it a marathon bar again, just like it used to be. Oh, that's interesting. A marathon bar. Why would they call it that? Is it because it's got nuts in it? Maybe it was made by someone who was having the Snickers brand on license, and maybe they've that license has lapsed and they've decided to go back to the other name. BG says, what heavyweight prospect seems the most promising to you? Well, in terms of the ones that are more advanced, because when you say prospect, there's a lot of guys that are at different sort of, stages, and for my prospect videos that I did this year in terms of the best prospects, I had a limit of, you had to have had more than 5 fights, but less than 15. Whereas I had another video which was called Emerging Prospects, guys who had typically under 5 fights, or basically who had fought no one, no real step-ups that you could discern. But in terms of the ones that have had, between 10 and 15 fights at this point, I mean, Daniel Dubois, you can't sort of really go past him. I think he's sort of edging ahead of everyone else in terms of a few areas, but there's other guys that are not far behind, and some of them have been denied opportunities. I think Hrgovic has lost out on a few opportunities that he could have had. But there's 6 guys that I've really had as a top 6 cluster for a couple of years now. Dubois, Joe Joyce, Tony Yoka, Filip Hrgovic, Aslanbek Makhmedov, and there is one more. Dubois, Joyce, Yoka, Hrgovic, Makhmedov, Ifeah Jugba. And as we've seen, some of them have been in, I think a lot of people have been quick to write off a guy like Ifeah Jugba because he's been in some fights where he's been tested, but I look at those as opportunities where you can see from fight to fight there's development, and you don't necessarily want to have some of these guys having not been tested on the way up, because if they're not getting the test, maybe they're not developing as much as they could. Maybe they get to a point where people will say they're exposed. Some people have said Ifeah Jugba is exposed, but I still think his ceiling, based on the improvements he's making, I think he can still do something in the heavyweight division. I mean, the heavyweight division is never really, super deep. And I think even as it is, he's, probably a top 30 guy somewhere there or thereabouts. At this point that I mean. Colin says Hrgovic needs to move up to contender level. Well, he's been trying, can't get the fights, and that's part of the problem when your record is 10-0. People are, one, you're a risky fighter for anyone, but 2, if you lose, people say, well, you got beaten by a prospect. Probably affects their career too. Also, so I didn't include Bakadir Jalilov in my top prospects because it's back down to the amateurs. But yeah, in terms of if there was 7 guys, so once he's been to the Olympics, all that sort of stuff, he is definitely, and I have a video up on the channel about Bakadir Jalilov, did it down during the lockdown. So you can find that in, if you go to the playlist section on the channel, and there's like March documentaries onwards, so basically when the pandemic struck, etc. I did a video, Bakadir Jalilov Next Big Thing, just sort of highlighting some of his career to date, from the amateurs up to the pros as well. But now we know he's dropped back down to the amateurs, pursuing Olympic glory, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, he certainly is one to watch. But guys, I see Colin has said he likes Daichko, Sanchez. Yeah, I like those guys too. Daichko is one of those guys that double Olympic bronze medalist, 6'9". You can't teach that height. He's got good skills, but he's seemingly been mismanaged and not being in the fights that he should be. He's only had, 7 or so fights since he turned pro, and there's been no suspensions or anything or bans like Tony Yoka had. Deitch fighting, and he should be in better fights by now. So he feels like wasted talent at this point. So I had to move him back in my top 15 of best prospects. I put him right at the back of the 15, simply because it was almost getting to the point where it's hard to keep him in there because he was fighting. But I think this year I had Frank Sanchez at number 7, and in that best prospects, which you can find in the playlist as well. I think actually at the moment it might be my the video when you come to the channel, for the first time. That's my pinned video. But Sanchez, yeah, I had him at 7-0. But for the criteria for those videos, a guy like Sanchez is basically moving on to contender level now. He's basically at that point. He only squeaked in because he's 15 fights in. BG says, got to check out Jalalov, never seen him. Well, do check out that that video that I've got up in the playlist, March 2020 documentaries onwards, or whatever the title is. Colin says, Makhmudov is powerful but a little slow. Daichko is just a monster. Well, the thing is with Makhmudov, clearly there's some defensive lapses, and even on the offensive end, he's a bit, you know, I don't want to say one pace, but he's right-hand dominant. Right hand, right uppercut, loves to throw those punches, but he's extremely effective, and he wants to take your head off with every single punch. And I'm realistic that maybe his talent level is going to sort of cap out at a certain level, but he's one of these guys that's always going to come after you no matter what. He's really fun to watch, and I think he's going to get some good wins in the heavyweight division. A lot of people will probably write him off and go, hey, he's no good, but he's going to be a guy that probably does get some upset wins over some guys that are considered good boxers that should be able to outbox him, but they get caught by something and taken out. And Unger, he's rightly pointing out Tristan Kalkruth, that he'll be a heavyweight champ at some point. So he is at cruiserweight at the moment. Young guy, what is he, 21, 19 or something like that. Very young, but a very good talent. Eddie Sasa says Sorenko, even though he looked poor in his last fight. Yeah, I have him in my top 10, but hopefully he comes in better shape and puts on a better performance next time out. That wasn't a great performance. First Round Boxing says, have you seen Farr versus Makhmudov in the WSB? Farr looked outstanding, super fast and using movement, unlike we've seen as a pro. Highly recommend. Yeah, good performance there. BG London says Tony Yoka disappeared after the Dave Alen fight. Well, he was banned for missing for a year for missing drug testing, so didn't disappear. He just wasn't allowed to fight in France. He could have gone elsewhere, decided not to, but he's back September 5th versus Johan Dubois. Carlito says 10-week training camp, Hearn versus Warren. Who wins? How much could that make? Well, Hearn's 6'5", and Frank's, isn't he like 70 years old? So yeah, I think that's only going one way. So Lubak says he'd like to see Milas step up in his next fight. Yeah, he's a guy who's sort of been a bit MIA. There was a bit of injury last year, so hopefully we'll see Peter Milas again. He actually just posted on social media, so he is in the gym, he is training. And Don says there is a stream for the Cassius Chaney fight on Crackstream. So Unger says, how much does Francis Warren have to do with Queensberry cards? Heard he's running the fight side of the business, Frank taking a back seat. Could be that. I mean, maybe Frank Warren's just a figurehead. I don't know. Frank Warren will have some sort of succession plan in place because he's not going to be wanting to promote cards forever and a day. At some point when he decides to hang it up, he's got to have his sons who are working in the business ready to take over. So Colin says, loads of really good Eastern European Olympians going pro, but I feel it's too late for many. Very tough to start at 30 or 31. Yeah, I mean, a guy like Yevgeny Romanov, who's now, 14, 15-0, something like that. Now 35, he turned pro at 32, I think it was. Joe Joyce turned pro at, also 32. I mean, you have a little bit of a delay because of things getting pushed back, a clog up the top between mandatories for champions, etc. Pandemic pushes things out as well. All of a sudden, some of the best years your prime go, and can Yevgeny Romanov get in some big fights to get where he wants to go? It's a question. BG London says Frank Sanchez is impressive in my opinion. Well, he looked great in his last fight. Let Me Suck Your Toes Girl says, you're a rugby fan, Squared. I'll never understand how you lot are so good at playing with funny shaped balls. So jealous. Hopefully the great game catches on in Belarus. Yep, I'm a rugby fan. In more recent years, since I started the channel, I've certainly watched less in terms of like Super Rugby and that sort of stuff. But I try to go as many All Blacks Test matches as possible. So I think this might be the first year where I might not be going to any, maybe in about 10 years or so. yeah, because of the pandemic. So we'll have to see what happens the rest of the year, and crowds, all that sort of stuff. Thomas says, thoughts on who would be a good opponent for Murat Gassiev's debut? It depends. In Russia, maybe we can't expect too much. It's unclear what his promotional status is. So Right Hook Boxing, he's out. He says, catch you later. Good stream, mate. It's probably left 10 minutes ago. I'm behind on the chat. But yeah, thanks for that, Right Hook Boxing. And if you haven't already done so, do check out his channel. Excuse me. So he's got a great channel. Do check it out. So Lubak, he is also dashing, so thank you for joining. Jim Blomqvist says Hrgovic is ranked in the top 10 in the transnational boxing rankings based on the Molina win, which I find odd. Yeah, ranking him top 10 off that one performance where there were a couple of moments I was like, I mean, I would say that's putting him top 10's maybe a bit premature, but, you know, Hrgovic has been, since he turned pro, my favourite prospect. So he's the guy I've really watched quite closely, and I've, yeah, the way he used to fight as an amateur and the way he was fighting early on in his pro career, but he's seemingly going away from that a little bit. So I think maybe Daniel Dubois has sort of been separating himself a little bit from his peers. I mean, this fight he's having this weekend won't tell us anything, but yeah, seemingly Hrgovic is waiting and watching and wanting that fight, a big fight, just not getting it delivered. BG London says Frank Sanchez versus Oscar Rivas. That'd be a good fight. I think I'd pick Sanchez to win that one. Will Magic Man says, when is the... it will be happening, but they haven't announced the a number of cards on Fox for the back end of the year. So all of the PBC heavyweights are sort of tied up, and we'll have to see what happens there. Rivas was getting soundly outboxed by Jennings, pulled it out in the last round. Not huge on Rivas, to be honest. Well, I had Jennings winning that fight heading into it, but the judges, two of them at least, had Rivas up. So if it had have gone to a decision, it sounds like he would have got the decision. Paulus says Sanchez versus Rivas. I'd have some of that. Enjoy that. Go to the North versus South BS. Was that with the crowd though? To be honest, I really haven't been following it. So apparently I've skipped down to the end. So apologies if I missed your comment. And yeah, I know some people sometimes get a bit bent out of shape. So it's not deliberate. If it was responding to someone else, I wouldn't have read it. But if you do have a comment or something, do drop it. And now at the bottom of the screen, the stream, so I can actually get to it now. So Unrivaled says, Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News. So he's got another great channel too. He says, big ups, man. Hope you are well. Yeah, not too bad. I mean, there's been a lot of hay fever recently. It was sort of pollen, I should say, and I've had a bit of hay fever. But apart from that, a little bit tired, but otherwise all good. G'd up for some more boxing this weekend. Good card tomorrow with Jose Ramirez, or a good fight, main event at least. BG says, who would you match Hrgovic with? Well, it's part of it is, are they going to put the money up for Hrgovic, but also are other people, opponents, going to want to sort of, for what might be not great money, but also high risk. Yeah, it's a struggle. I mean, in an ideal world, and none of those factors were an issue, he'd be in some good fights. But yeah, sort of in that little bit of, as I was explaining with Yevgeny Romanov, there's a number of guys, Martin Bacoldi, in kind of a no man's land at the moment. Just needs someone to sort of, put that hook out there with the... Colin says, Jennings, Washington, Martin, glut of opponents. Hard Talk with Ulti says, don't forget that Aram is doing exactly the same thing with Pulev. Yes or no? Missed that out, didn't you, frankly? But the situation the same. A mandatory coming between the big fight, his pal Bob. I'm not sure who that's directed at, because I've made that comment a number of times in the past week or so. If Dillian White's been called a blocker, or had been called a blocker, Bob Arum is using Pulev as the same, effectively saying, mandatories, other stuff shouldn't get in the way, but he's using Pulev and saying he needs to get his shot. So, yeah, it is what it is. I mean, promoters will do whatever they have to do for themselves, for their own best interest, not everyone else's, and the fans often are the poorer for it. Rahowa says, Rivas was always setting up Jennings for the KO I can say that because I saw most of Rivas's fights before that, back when he couldn't get a license to the US. It's his MO. Well, that was an interesting fight in the sense that Rivas, until that last round knockout, hadn't really been able to take anyone out in the second half of a fight after it went about past 5 rounds. It was going to a decision. So, he closed the show in style there. So Unrivaled says, do you have any issues? I mean, not sure what you're saying there. Cash Cow says, at Boxing Squared with the peace sign. Hello to you too. MMA Champ says, Big Dan, welcome mate. Unrivaled Boxing Talking News says, do you have any issues with Povetkin being ranked top 3 at heavyweight over Wilder? I haven't really sort of thought about that sort of issue. I mean, I'm not sure just on that one performance, does that put him top 3? I don't know. I'd need to think about that one. But generally, I've kind of thought, at least in the past, since Wilder was obliterated by Fury, that it's seemingly a top sort of 2 or 3, then it's kind of like 4 to 7. Or previously I'd thought about maybe 4 to 7, 7 to about 15. But maybe there's about 6 or 7 guys that you can sort of almost plug and play, and they're roughly on about the same level. Maybe Dillian White had been separating himself from that pack with some of the wins and the resume he'd been building, but I think that loss to Povetkin sort of pulls him back into that pack. And it's not to say he's not a good fighter, and it's not to say he can't beat Povetkin in the rematch, but clearly he's still a talented fighter who's got some good wins in the heavyweight division. I mean, people can't take that away. And when people say that he was exposed, I mean, I don't think he was, because we'd been saying ahead of that fight that one of the things that was a talking point, and I've been through it in my preview video too, and a lot of others had, that White had been a bit shaky, had been down against guys, and there was the potential for him to get hurt in that fight, but also the potential for Povetkin to be hurt too. So yeah, I think the rankings have been quite fluid. I'd certainly have Tyson Fury as the number 1, and then Joshua at 2. I mean, I think a lot of people recently have been forgetting about Andy Ruiz Jr. too, so he's probably still in my top 5, but maybe 3 to 5, it's sort of fluid. I don't know. White had been, I think, between about 4 to 6 in my mind beforehand, but it's, sort of interchangeable guys. And I had Povetkin in my top 10, but maybe I think it was 8 or 9. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and have a look. I did a top 15 a number of months ago on Patreon. Let Me Suck Your Toe says, do you watch any minimum weight boxing? I do. It makes me feel real better about being barely 5'9" myself. I can't say I watch too much boxing below sort of about 126. I watch like from about 115 to 122, the different weight classes there. I'll, more cherry pick those big fights. There's a lot of good names down there, that are in some good fights and have been in some good fights. But in terms of following it more, those divisions more broadly, outside of maybe half a dozen names that I'll, look out for in different cards and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's been some really good flyweight action in recent years, and super fly cards, and obviously there's about 5 or 6 guys that have had a bit of a round robin to some extent in some of those divisions, beating each other. So those are interesting fights that'll certainly, when they've been on a lot of cards either in America, sometimes elsewhere as well. But I can't say below below 112 that I really watch any fights at all. So yeah. So MMA Champ says, Hrgovic is an amazing prospect, but does he beat any of the top heavyweights? He says, I doubt it. Well, we need to see him in some fights, some opportunities, because he's in that phase where he's trying to cross over from prospect to sort of fringe contender, but he needs the opportunity to show us what he's about. Conniff says, in boxing, we always say things like, depends on what the judges like when it comes to scoring controversial fights. What's your bias when it comes to scoring? I mean, I think everyone scores fights a little differently, but I think generally most people the cards are sort of in a certain range. It can be more what you like, effective aggression, ring generalship, and other stuff like that. Because sometimes a close round, the punches landed might be quite similar, but it might be 1 or 2 shots from one guy where the cleaner, more effective work, and that sometimes can get around. But even with judges, they don't always score the same rounds for the same guy. Cash Cow says Povetkin and Whyte are just making up the numbers. That's pretty ruthless. Rahowa says he lulls you into a false sense of security, soaks it up. The Jennings fight did go later than he would have wished. Povetkin is mid-tier top 10. Whyte's now in it. Parker, Whyte, Povetkin, Hunter, Ortiz. Yeah, I mean, those guys, I think that's pretty 10 type guys that I was sort of talking about. And you can sort of have like Andy Ruiz sort of in there as well. And I guess after Fury 1 takes a similar sort of beating that he took in the first fight, people will sort of drop him down. I know that there are some people who, because they don't like Wilder for whatever reason, have sort of written him off completely. But he's still in my top 5 at least. Nathan says, did you watch the Kulkai and Burrell fight? Another bad decision tonight. I was sort of busy putting some stuff together for the stream and other bits and pieces and saving different stuff I pulled down from Instagram. So I was aware it was on, and I was seeing a little bit of stuff on Twitter when I was sort of just going back and forth, but didn't see it. Cameron says Whyte was lazy and let Povetkin get in too close too often, underestimated him. Well, part of their strategy, and obviously as the fight played out, Whyte, was having success. 4th round, dropped him twice. Maybe he did get a bit too comfortable. Maybe it was a bit lazy. But, repeat or revenge. I mean, there's a lot to like about the rematch, even though some people aren't happy that there is a rematch. Unger says, judging, clean punching, effective aggression, ring generalship, defense. Yeah, pretty much what I covered off there. And even because it's so subjective, we're all going to have different, that metrics in our mind how we're judging something. Certainly, I mean, I think one that sort of divided opinion at the time was Joseph Parker versus Hughie Fury. I mean, I had that really close, whereas some people did have it 118, 110 for Parker. So it depends what you like, I guess. And I'm as you guys all know, I'm a Parker fan, but I had that really, really close. Cash Cow says Whyte and Povetkin have zero influence on the landscape. Ruiz is better than both. Well, Ruiz needs to get back in there, prove it, and I can understand why he's having this sort of what will be a fun sort of tune-up against Chris Arreola. But, in a way, this year is completely... But, it's not optimized. We would have liked to have seen him go straight into a Luis Ortiz fight or something of that level where there was a bit more relevance on the line. But I understand why they've made the Arreola fight. He said he wanted to tune up, but also it may be the last time they could make that fight realistically. Because Arreola is approaching 40 and he's kind of been semi-retired, and he's sticking around now for some paydays. That's clear. Hard Talk with Ulti says, steering away from the obvious AJ vs Fury, but Pulev vs Povetkin is a good matchup. I like that fight. Yeah, I think that's one that's often long been talked about. Guys that have been, there or thereabouts, for so. It's a shame that they never actually, fought. Rohawa says, only since Gonzalez came to prominence about 5 years ago did I really bother with the small men. Now I follow those lower weight classes just as much. Well, I just really sort of check the sort of cherry pick the big fights in the different divisions, and certain fighters that are starting to get a bit more. I mean, it's nice for me as having a channel, because I think people sort of don't realize the time and effort and the stuff you don't see behind the scenes, the amount of effort that goes involved to sort of running one, and the time involved just to, I mean, I spent an hour this morning in terms of, saving photos and video training and different putting some stuff up on Twitter, writing the different live stream topics, all that sort of stuff you don't see in the preparation. So I think in terms of some of those lower weight classes, I wouldn't have followed them as much even a few years ago before the channel, but I would always be watching those fights. And there's maybe certain other divisions I'm not following as closely as I once did because I'm doing the heavyweight and spending more focus and time on that. But the good thing about just covering heavyweight is I can be a fan for all those other fights. So for tomorrow, for example, once I do the Dubois and Snijders post-fight review, I'll be doing a couple of Patreon videos I've got to get done before the end of the month, and Sunday is my normal day. So, but also I can in the afternoon, because there's a card in afternoon my time, which is the Ramirez fight. I can sort of sit back and just relax and watch that. BG says, Ruiz Areola got a date yet? No, not yet, but I expect it'll be November, somewhere around there, maybe even December. Will says, what I took from the Whyte Povetkin fight is that any of these guys from the top 3 down to a of taking each other out on a given night. Yeah, I think there is a bit of that, and styles are going to make fights, and their promoters know that some of the matchups and the style matchups in particular are not good for each other. This is why they maneuver them around different fighters and, you know, try to go for ones that are a bit more favorable, that still make sort of, you know, comparable money, all that sort of stuff, while positioning them for a title. Because if we got all the matchups that we wanted, some of these guys would have losses galore. And I still think the fact of having a loss and, you know, even having one loss or records being protected, I wish there was a bit more emphasis on making those fights that we want to see. Because I think that's part of the reason boxing has devolved over time and become more of a fringe sport, is because most of the time we don't get what we want in politics and all sorts of other stuff, and, you know, shenanigans in the background. It just, clouds everything and influences things to such a degree that we're lucky if we get even 10% of the fights that we'd really want to see. So Colin had it 7-5 for Huey Fury, I think. Unga says, Nathan, he's super talented, surprised Colkay had anything left. Okay, so that's that fight where there was the... I haven't seen that fight, so I can't really comment, but apparently another bad decision for the division. So Cash Cow says, Boxing Squared, Whyte loses to Fury, Joshua Wilder maybe, Whyte loses to Parker in the sequel, Whyte Ruiz could be alright, but Ruiz's hands are too quick for Whyte. Yeah, I mean, a lot of dangerous fights out there, but if Whyte's in them and taking dangerous fights, you've got to give him the credit. He's come through some fights that he was expected to lose, and he's sometimes there's circumstances, a little bit of luck, and that headbutt, etc., or head clash I should say, in that Parker fight, but it's boxing. He's come through. You got to credit him for taking these fights, putting his risking certain things, risking the mandatory, and he got through. Obviously against Povetkin it sort of backfired, but that's boxing. It's why we love the division too, with some of the knockouts and the sort of stuff that happens. If we could only get more of those sorts of fights that had divisional relevance, the sport would be much better for it. So Colin says, I appreciate the heavy channel, really enjoyed listening to your work during lockdown. Love light heavyweight, cruiserweight and heavyweight. Well, thank you for the feedback about the stuff that I did during lockdown. I did try to do, I think I did about 10 different sort of mini-type documentaries, and I sort of wound back sort of doing daily stuff because there wasn't as much to do, but I did, when it was there, I did cover it. Yeah, it's one of these things, and I can still see it in my analytics. A lot of people who were following haven't come back in full force yet. So, numbers are still down a little bit to pre-pandemic, but just have to adapt. Just because maybe there's a few less people coming to the channel than there once was, because obviously the interests are elsewhere, doesn't mean I'm not going to, do videos. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the content, and be doing more live streams. And I'm thinking about the channel and how it's evolving over time and the content I'm providing, and hopefully it's sort of hitting the right mark for the most part. But it is one of these things, it's a work in progress. I'm not always going to get everything right. It's funny, sometimes people will say, oh, you picked this guy to win that fight. And it's like, well, it's an opinion, just like the unexpected does happen in boxing. So Unga says, one loss equals exposure. But it's quite interesting. That's not the way that it's seen in the UFC, for example. And I just wish it was more like that, because we'd get more fights that we do want to see. So Cash Cow says, I like Whyte, just don't think he has the skills to seriously challenge the top guys. He can fight all the youngsters. Rohowa says Ruiz would have done the double over Josh, and had he come in shape, he blew it. I don't mind the Areola fight. A good bet is a KO 1-3. I think Areola has got the potential to hang in for a bit more. I mean, maybe it'd be my pick would be maybe between rounds 5 to 8, maybe something like that. Nathan says losses shouldn't mean as much. Problem is now most fans completely dismiss guys after a loss, label fighters, hype jobs, etc. It's disappointing, but it won't change. And that is unfortunate. As I was mentioning earlier with some prospects, sometimes they can be in the right fight at the right time. It's the right test, but then people sort of turn on them. And a good example, and I'm not going to use the FA with Kevin Johnson. And there was plenty of people coming out immediately after that saying, oh, this guy's a hype job, and people had tried to build this guy up into something that he wasn't. He'd said this, that, and the other about Joshua, and a lot of people sort of went sour on him based on Johnson, who was a very durable journeyman, taking him in 10 rounds. But it was clear that that was a fight that he needed. He needed the rounds, and maybe he needed the reality check that he couldn't just sort of, all of a sudden a guy would fall down, because Johnson came to survive, and he did. And Dubois looked a little bit one-paced, but since then he worked on things, and he's looked a lot better. I think he's, setting up combinations a lot better now. And he can break a fighter down much better than, say, when he, at the time in 2018, when he fought Kevin Johnson. So Cash Cow says, Boxing Squared, 100% respect for Whyte, but he isn't good enough to beat the top guys. There's that whole round robin of fights that I'd hope we'd get. I mean, we often talk about, is this a golden age of heavyweight boxing? I think there was optimism for that. I'm not convinced that it's sort of panning. These guys, I mean, I'm sure Whyte might be able to spring an upset over some of the guys that you've said that he can't beat, but we're not going to know until we get these fights. Pacer says, I heard Povetkin got 4.5 mil. Anyone know what Whyte got? That feels quite high, actually. Wasn't White's previous highest something about 3 or 4 million for his own pay-per-views? I mean, I would have thought Povetkin would have been closer to like 1 or 2 million, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the numbers were. Previously, the Rivas and Whyte pay-per-view did about 290,000 buys, so I'm interested to see what the number is. Obviously, if it's a big number, then maybe Povetkin got a lot more than otherwise he was projected to get. Unga says, Rohawa, I have Areola going the distance versus Ruiz. And that's almost a situation, if that happens, I think there will be a bit of blowback for Ruiz, but I wouldn't be shocked if Areola does go the distance. But I wouldn't be picking an early stoppage if there is a stoppage. I think it would be a bit later in the fight. I think Ruiz is going to be countering him and hitting with some, with everything, with using his quick hands, because he's like a front foot counterpuncher. I think he's going to land something that's going to sort of hurt Areola, but Unga makes a good point. He's a durable guy. Rohawa says he was badly let down by Ruiz. He had a wedge on him for the repeat KO. I mean, there is a point to say, I mean, some people do say because Ruiz wasn't in the best shape, that was the factor why he didn't win. But I think we saw in that fight a different version of Joshua who removed the opportunities that Andy Ruiz needed to work with. And the times when there was a bit of, the distance was closed, it was a bit more close quarters, but then Joshua back to the outside, moving and working from range. I still think if Andy Ruiz Jr. was in shape, that sort of strategy probably would have worked for Joshua regardless. It's worked for others in the past, Joseph Parker, being the other guy, I should say. That was a close fight. Maybe it would have been a bit closer on the cards, but I think Joshua still would have been quite effective with that strategy. Nathan says, guys on social media calling it Dillian White a bum, journeyman. He has 27-2, both those losses to world-class fighters, and his solid wins over Parker, Rivas, Chisora says it all. Yeah, I mean, he's a good fighter. He's got a good record, one of the better records in the division in recent times. Tim says, hating on losses is the single most frustrating thing about boxing. You fight 10 50-50s, you should lose 5. If you ever get to 30-ish and 0, you are either an all-time great or a cherry picker. Some good points there. Rohowa says, Unga, interesting time will tell. I see an early KO for Ruiz if he comes in proper shape. Will Magic Man says, depending on which Areola turns up, it could be a long, hard night for Ruiz. Unga says, Areola has a great tin. Joe says he feels Areola will retire in the corner. And Unga says, and Ruiz don't have the work rate. I don't think bursts of action will get rid of Areola. Nathan says there are a lot of guys who are 20-0 who are talented boxers but still have padded records, and when they step up it hurts them due to low level of opposition. I mean, I think we can think of plenty of guys who have got those sorts of records and we just don't know how good they are. You know, they haven't been in the fights to know, can they really contend, or is it, you know, they're going to take a loss, they're waiting for a payday. You can probably think of a number of guys who are, you know, close to title shots or big fights. BG says, do you think Joshua's going to be back to his old self against Pulev, or is going to box like Ruiz to fight? I don't know if it's necessarily going to be like for like in terms of that second fight with Ruiz, but I don't think he's going to go in there and just try to steamroll him. All this sort of talk about he's going to go in there and just be dominant and just walk through Pulev, and he said he's going to walk through Pulev. Some of that is to build the fight. I think for the remainder of his career, Joshua is not going to be aggressive in some sense. I think he's going to have a bit more of a feeling out process, but if he gets this man hurt, I mean, I don't think he will be able to resist and take him out. Obviously, against Ruiz in that first fight, got clipped with a counter, and it sort of started the rot that, you know, ultimately saw him lose the fight. But, I mean, he will feel confident. But Kubrat Pulev, I mean, he will probably look at Anthony Joshua and think, if I can just manage to get this guy on the chin a couple of times with something decent, that he's in that fight. He's probably going to be looking for a left hook. Colin says, Tim, most of those O's get lucky too. Andre Ward lost the first Kovalev fight, and Fury lost to McDermott the first time, in his opinion. Nathan says, I never liked when people label fighters as bums. Seems disrespectful. Yeah, I mean, I think it is. Even guys that are lower level in all, you know, levels of the sport, that are, you know, journeymen. I mean, some people get a bit worked out when you call someone a journeyman, or a couple of times I've sort of said that I think a fighter might be a bit of a journeyman in waiting. And that's not necessarily to be disrespectful to them, but most of the time it's panned out to be true too. I mean, I remember this quite vividly, Ariel Bracamonte, who was fighting Dave Alen. Someone got really up in their feelings that I said this guy was basically a journeyman. The record was padded to shreds. It was nothing there. He ended up having a good fight with Dave Alen, but since then he's basically gone on and lost to a whole bunch of guys. Tranche from France. Also, there was that loss that he had to that Nigerian who Rodney Hernandez actually upset. So, yeah, Jared Anderson's taking on Rodney Hernandez on September the 5th. So that's interesting for a few reasons too. Hernandez, a very durable guy. So Rohawa says, I agree Boxing Square. Joshua took a different approach, but I think Ruiz had been as hungry to win the rematch as he was to take the crown. Joshua wouldn't have been able to stay away. The Flying Pan Man says Guido Vianello versus Hemi Ahio on the Parker versus Far undercard. Probably not going to be Guido versus Hemi, but it may end up being some sort of Hemi Ahio versus maybe best available New Zealand heavyweight below Ahio. I don't know. Maybe it would be an Australian heavyweight who would be brought in. Probably not going to be great. Whoever Ahio faces, it'll be a Duco card, so it'll be a cheap undercard. Got to remember that. So Unga says pads don't hit back. Very easy to plant your feet on the pads. Okay, so we're 2 hours and 18 minutes into the chat, into the live stream. I've caught up. I'm probably going to bail here. I'm starting to not lose my voice, but certainly 2 hours straight off talking. It's not something I normally do, but yeah, thank you for joining again. Another Boxing Squared live stream. So it's almost lunchtime here, so I haven't had breakfast. Might have some spaghetti on toast or something like that. But anyway, I will leave it there. You don't need to worry about my my lunch/breakfast or whatever I'm having. But I do thank you for joining again, wherever you are, morning, noon, or night. Do have a good weekend and enjoy the boxing, and we'll be back sometime soon. Thanks very much for watching.